Good evening. Welcome to the May 2nd, 2023 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Next item on our agenda for this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item is the roll call. Please note that all members of the council are present this evening. Earlier this evening, the council did participate in a workshop where we received an update from our chief of police on public safety items for the summer 2023 season. All right, next item for this evening is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as is, or would anyone care to suggest a change?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Very good. And a second?
Second.
Okay, a motion's been first and seconded by Councilmember Parkhill. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next up this evening in our public forum, just a reminder for everyone who's in attendance to indicate if you would please state your name and address, indicate if you are representing a group. We also ask that comments are limited to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those of you who are in person, we ask that you fill out a form that is located at the back of the room on the table and hand it to staff. For those watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know what agenda item you wish to speak about. We also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. City Manager, do we have any remote comments as part of the public forum?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay, and seeing that we don't have anybody else in the audience wishing to speak, we'll move on to new business, or pardon me. We'll move on to new agenda items. Our first, let's see, number 6 is for any member of the council who would like to discuss a specific matter at a future time. Anything?
Madam Mayor?
Yes. Councilmember
So,
Blackish.
Madam Mayor, I would like to propose that the council finally take up the idea of having chickens and having an ordinance in the city. It's something I brought up about 3 years ago, and it was to wind its way through the zoning study, and it never really quite got done. So I'd like to have it brought before us as an individual item.
Okay, thank you. Everybody okay with a discussion about this at a future time? Yeah? City Manager?
Madam Mayor, what I would suggest is that as early as the next meeting or within the next month or so, we could get a broad update of all the stuff on the zoning ordinance or the zoning the zoning task force and all the priorities. Mm-hmm. And that is the chicken study or the chicken analysis. Potential amendments are on that list. And if the council, when we last reviewed it, we had a different council, different priorities. We've accomplished a lot. We could discuss the priority ranking and maybe as a result of that conversation, move it up a lot higher and move forward with it quicker.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds good. So we'll get an update, figure out where it is on the list, Councilmember Blackish, and then
Okay.
take it from there. All right. Very good. Yes.
Mayor, I have one, but I think it might be just more appropriate to actually ask staff at the end of the meeting, because it's not really an agenda item, but it's a question I have in general for some summer issues.
Okay.
So if I just can have some time at the end of the meeting, that'd be great.
Sure. If you'll remind me, just in case I forget. That'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you. All right, so we'll talk about the chicken ordinance at an upcoming workshop/meeting. Next up is our consent agenda. On this evening's consent agenda, we have approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of April 4 and April 18, 2023, and the Local Board of Appeal and Equalization hearing meeting minutes of April 4, 2023. We have approval of the check register. We have approval of municipal licenses. We have adoption of amendments to Energy and Environment Committee bylaws and Resolution 27-2023, appointing David Ferry to the Energy and Environment Committee. We have approval of the change order for beach playground equipment. And lastly, award of the contract to Bituminous Roadways Incorporated for 2023 Mill and Overlay Project. Any members of the council wish to pull one of those items for further discussion or have any questions of staff?
Mayor, I have a question on E, approval or the change order for the beach playground equipment.
Excellent, go ahead.
So staff, I'm just looking for some clarification. In our packet, oh boy, this page has got kind of mucked up. So if we look at the invoice from the Wayzata Beach Playground D10421B3, it lists out the items. On the second page of this invoice, it shows the Game Time GT Wave, but there's no unit costs associated with it. That's dated 5/14 of 2021. My question is, why are we getting an invoice in November 23rd of 2022 for an item that was already installed quite a few months prior to that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Iverson, great question. So it has been discussed between staff and the vendor for quite some time. So the data on there is a little bit misleading. Ultimately, that was always a part of the design, but I believe there was some miscommunication between the Parks and Trails Board and the vendor on how or when that was to be paid. Ultimately, it wasn't. It was on the design, but it wasn't as a line item on the cost. And in discussion with staff and the vendor, that should have been a line item, and it wasn't. So now we're kind of making that whole and finalizing this part of the contract and invoice, I guess.
It seems like missing a $60,000 piece of equipment is a pretty big whoop. How do you miss that? I mean,
Well, there again, I think there was some maybe misunderstandings of how, if there was additional business by the contractor with other projects, that there would be some economies of scale with the work. Ultimately, that's not how they're two separate contracts. That's not how we function. There were originally intended to be, the contracts were intended to be, or the projects were intended to be combined. So ultimately, there's not the economies of scale that the vendor was realizing. So as a result, they had informed us that, no, they need to get paid for that design item. And we've been discussing it for a while. That's why it has taken us a while to reach this conclusion. But ultimately, after meeting with staff, city attorney, their folks, we feel like this is the best approach moving forward, and we're still on budget as well. And it's still the design that was ultimately approved by the council.
so if we don't pay for it, is it a true statement that they will come and remove it?
Whether that's a true, we'll have to figure out a solution if we don't pay for it. And one of one of their ways to remediate the issue was to remove it, and that wasn't acceptable to us.
No, I absolutely do not want to see that happen. I think it's a great piece of equipment. I'm just trying to say, is there some cost perhaps that they should pick up as well? Because I think that there's some history in this discussion of that item that perhaps maybe the city shouldn't be liable for the entire cost.
That could be the case, that when we met with all the parties involved, that wasn't brought up at all.
Any other questions?
No, I just maybe have that discussion and see if we can negotiate that a little bit, but we do not want to lose it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson. My question on this item centers around the cost. So the $53,237, is that the original quoted price?
That's my understanding, yeah, from 2021, yes.
Okay, so, and then when the council approved the project, we allocated a budget of $330,000, correct?
That's correct, yep.
Were there any further approvals from the council?
Not that I recall, Mayor.
Okay, so what about the original contract? What did the contract that we approve call for?
I believe it was 272.86.
I don't think that was in here.
That's the number from the memo. The attachment showing the entire list of things doesn't incorporate some of the costs. So I'd have to talk with City Engineer Kelly about what additional items were on that. It could have been some additional consultant costs associated with the construction. But this was just for the materials, essentially.
Okay. I just want to make sure that as a council, we did not approve an amount to exceed what has already been paid, plus this $53,237.
Right.
That we're only approving it as a council one time.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Very good. Yes?
One question.
Councilmember?
So I got the GT Wave at 59,999, not 53. That was the Mister. Did we do the Mister? On page two, I guess it's 205, although it's kind of marked out. You have 272 plus the 53, 237.
Yeah, and
Just
then,
saying if we did the Mister, it would put us over budget, I think.
yeah, the memo says 53,237, but the invoice shows 59,999.
Yeah, I think that doesn't
Different
include
things, I think.
the material surcharge and some of the other associated costs. What I would recommend, Madam Mayor and council members, is because there's some good specific questions, we could table this item and I could have City Engineer Kelly kind of run through it a little bit more and answer any of those questions, and better than I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's pull that item for a discussion at our future meeting. Make sure we've got things ironed out here. Perfect. Okay. Good questions. Anything further on consent agenda? All right. Very good. So would someone care to make a motion to approve the consent agenda items A through D and item F?
Madam Mayor, so moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. Item E will be tabled for a future meeting.
Yeah. Should be able to handle it next meeting.
Okay. Do we need to make a motion to officially table that? No? Okay. Very good. So now with that out of the way, we are on to new business. The first item under new business, 8A, is to consider approval of contract amendment with Kraus Anderson for construction management services for Panaway Phase 2A Boardwalk and Community Docks Project. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a brief presentation to walk through tonight. Oh, we don't, okay. Madam Mayor and Council, just a little bit of background of this item before we go into more details of the actual action that's requested. As the city did with the first phase of Panaway and hiring stall construction, we're requesting that we utilize the services of a construction manager to move forward with the second phase, 2A of Panaway, which is the boardwalk and the community docks. It's very common for cities, entities like ours to utilize construction managers just because we don't have the capacity or the skill set in-house to provide those services, both on the construction side and the pre-construction side that we've been using Kraus Anderson for thus far. They really reduce the burden on city staff and provide project leadership and coordination on cost estimating, building administration, site inspections, safety, communications, all those sorts of things. If you remember back in November of last year, we approved a pre-construction services agreement with KA to move forward with Panaway Phase 2A. That agreement was really about getting kind of a taste of the market and bidding the project out so we could have good competition and hopefully come at budget or near budget. And also working with not only our designers, but folks that would be involved in building the structure in terms of logistics. It's a complicated project. It involves being on the lake, it involves railroad tracks. So utilizing their expertise to put the best project forward and get the best and most competitive bids. And hopefully that aligns with the resources we have to move forward with it. We're really happy with the relationship and the work that Kraus Anderson has accomplished thus far. So we're recommending moving forward and continuing that relationship with ultimately amending the original contract that was approved by the council in November to add on construction services. So not pre-construction, but moving forward with the project. Specifically, the draft agreement that's included in your packet includes fees and work scopes for construction management. And those fees are about $200,000, which is a percentage of the construction cost. General condition services, which is essentially fixed costs that are reimbursables, so there's no kind of additional money that is being paid to Kraus for that. It's just the cost of having the materials and the fencing and all that sort of thing out on site. And then there's also the on-site services that we're paying for too, coordination and communications for Kraus. That is projected at $310,000. These costs are all a part of our budget. They've all been planned. We've reviewed the legal legalities of the contract with our city attorney. We've had both staff and our owner's rep, Jesse Houlihan of Onyx Strategic Partners, review the project or the contract. We feel comfortable moving forward with the draft contract that's in your packet tonight. And so overall, the recommendation is to approve the amended agreement with Kraus Anderson for construction management advisor services for Panaway, which includes the boardwalk and the community docks. Bob Jansen of KA is here to answer any questions. I told him that he didn't need to make a presentation, but we're happy to either myself or Bob answer any questions that you may have.
Excellent, thank you, City Manager. Questions of Mr. Dahl? No?
One question. I assume that the fee that's being charged, the fluctuating fee is common?
Yes, absolutely.
1.9, okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Councilmember Parkhill?
So this might be a question for Kraus Anderson, but if it's a percent of the cost, so 1.95% of the cost, which is $310,000, why does it matter if we go past 8 months and go to 9 months and 10 months if it's typical to have I guess I'm asking you too, typical to have it as a percentage of cost. I don't know if there's additional costs to you. I heard something about fencing. Because I guess I don't see the incentive for this project to end at 8 months if you guys are actually getting more per month in month 9, month 10, month 11. And assuming it's part your responsibility as construction managers to make sure that this is managed smoothly and within costs, doesn't seem like those incentives align.
Yeah, the way that this contract sits, there is no incentive to complete the job or to run past. Because it is, our fee is based on the cost of the work.
Yeah, but there's
So
an
the-
additional 40,000
The
extra.
additional is for reimbursables, they're not to exceeds. So they would, when you talk about fencing, if fencing has to stay out there for an extra month, if there is any additional insurances, restrooms, it is all reimbursable costs, and those are, we're essentially just adding that to the stipulated sum. So since it is reimbursables, we would not, it's not a fee that we make on that.
Okay, I see the
It's a
not to
direct
exceed, yeah.
pass-through.
Okay.
Yep. So we're just trying to give you a rough order magnitude of where those costs would be, and we're capping those.
So those are the variable costs.
Yep.
But if hours-wise, you run over, I mean, I would assume if it takes 10 months instead of 8 months, if your typical fee is a percentage of the construction costs, you would be spending less hours in month 1 through 8 and more and then some of those hours in 9 and 10. So if you're going to charge us an hourly rate in 9 and 10, that seems to be, other than if it's, to maintain the porta potties and put fences back up if they get blown over, that kind of thing.
So that wage shows for each additional week or each additional month, we're capping that, and that would include site services, our supervision, so our site superintendent that would be on site. Those hours are included in that, and those are all reimbursable. If we're not on site, if we're not working on the job, they're not going to be billed to your project. Is how it's structured, but we are capping it too, as far as how much we can bill on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, if it extends past that 8 months.
Are you saying that typically it would be significantly less than, and there's an increase there too, because under the normal contract, it was $38,766 a month, and you're saying it's going to be $44,987 a month, so that's $6,000 more per month. That cost,
It's not, it's more, it's rolling into the site services plus our general conditions. And like I said, it's more of a rough order magnitude, a stipulated sum increase where we would provide all the backup, show if we're using that, but if we don't use it, we would not invoice that weekly rate or that monthly rate as well.
okay, I guess I understand with some of your costs that they would increase the longer this project goes on. But I also feel like there's some of your costs that would just be spread out over 10 months versus 8 months, using 10 months as the example.
Because as our general conditions go, as part of the base contract to this, the original C-132, we do have our rates and everything associated with our site services they're all set. I guess we will stick to that rate throughout the duration of this contract. So the same rate that we're using in month 1 would be the same rate we would have months 9 and 10. And that's where, if you refer to that contract, we have a list of all of our general conditions and what those rates would be.
What percentage are those of the total monthly charge typically?
Of the total charge,
Of the 39,000?
I guess I'm not understanding of the 39,000, what percentage of the 39 our general conditions are?
Yeah, that would be, fees that you would incur in month in any additional time period.
There's not really a percentage, because everything that builds those is all just based on, it's just based on hourly rates. If a superintendent is on site for 40 hours a week, that's then it's going to be consistent 40 hours a week, and his rate would be consistent throughout that. Same with our other administrative costs or site services conditions.
So had this been a 10-month project instead of an 8-month project,
Yep.
you're saying that the 1.95 would have been higher?
No. 1.9, the 1.95 is strictly our fee for as a construction manager on the project. But the site services and our general conditions are all administrative costs. It's all real cost to the project. It's to have a full-time superintendent on site. They're separate buckets. Where the fee is, that's based on cost, is what Kraus Anderson, the
So
construction.
only a portion of the 310,000 is related to the 1.95 fee. The rest is some supervision and,
Of the 310, then none of that is our fee. That's all just strictly site services, general conditions. Yep.
okay.
Yep.
I didn't.
Yeah, they're two separate buckets. I guess on that slide that Jeff was showing earlier, there's essentially 3 buckets that you're looking at. There's the roughly 200,000 that's based off of where the current estimate is. That's the 1.95. So that's our fee. When you get into the general conditions and services, that's putting fencing up, restrooms, dumpsters, insurances, but it's all going to be real costs. If we use it, then that.
Okay.
You would review, approve that.
Okay.
That would be used out of that bucket, same with site.
I understand now.
Got it.
Thank you.
Other questions? No? I have one question. I don't know if better answered by staff or, I think we touched on this a little bit, but now I'm utterly confused. We're anticipating that the project takes 8 months.
Right.
If the project goes, we'll continue along the same example, 10 months due to weather delays. The $200,000 fee that I see, that's not changing.
Correct.
If we need fencing for an additional couple months, restrooms, anything else, that may change in that 2-month period, correct? Okay. And then on-site services, coordination and communications, that may change as well in those 2 months?
That may change based on how much of it needs to be used during the shutdown.
Okay.
It's,
So technically, this isn't a flat fee for 8 months. If we have pouring rain, a monsoon for 30 days out of the 8 months, and you guys aren't on site, that 30 days would technically carry over into month 9, and we would not get charged for that? Is that correct?
yeah, yep, correct. I mean, those are stipulated sums where if something were to happen, we're not on site. If our superintendent is having on-site supervision is a big component of that. If our
Yep.
superintendent is not on site, you wouldn't see a charge for him. And that's a big chunk of that bucket.
Okay. So it sounds like we're paying you when you're working.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fair
Way of
enough.
saying
What I was basically trying to ask.
Okay. Well, see, we got there. Teamwork, absolutely. All right, thank you so much. All right. Any other questions, concerns, discussion? Discussion? Anybody? No? All right. Well, then would someone care to make a motion to approve an amendment to the agreement with Kraus Anderson Construction Company for construction manager and advisor services for Panaway Phase 2A Boardwalk Community Docks project?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Plekish. And a second. Second. Motion's been first and seconded. Any further discussion?
Mayor, I am going to vote nay on this since I have voted nay on all of the boardwalk things. So it's not specific to Kraus Anderson, but it's general overall.
Understood. Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay?
The motion passes. Moving on to the, thank you very much, to Kraus Anderson. We have really appreciated the work done thus far, and looking forward to, I guess I'd say breaking ground, but we're breaking ground in the water. It's going to be exciting.
Breaking water.
Yes, so thank you very much. All right, next item under new business is to consider adoption of Resolution 26-2023, adopting updated Panaway signage design standards. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Gilner is going to, I believe, give an intro and then introduce some other folks that are here to talk about this item as well.
Great, thank you, Mayor and Council. So we adopted a policy on naming and dedication to city-owned land and facilities in March 2021. The policy allows requests to be made to the City Council for naming city-owned land or facilities through a donation process. This policy provides a clear process for reviewing and approving requests that the City Council reviews. It provides standards for signage and other visual aspects associated with a donation or a naming opportunity. The policy also provides opportunities for valuable public and private support of our city projects and spaces. And at this time, we're not presenting any updates to that policy. It's been working well for us thus far. But tonight, we would like to talk about a specific aspect of that policy that's associated with it. In Section F, the policy calls for signage design standards specifically for Panaway, given its prominent location within the city. And so we adopted design standards in March 2021 at the same time as the policy. At the time, it included guidance for the size of signs, the colors, the fonts, the materials of the signage, and it also incorporated the use of our historic plat map of Wayzata as a background image that can be used on signage. It included at the time general locations for signage, and it had many options in it, but it didn't really have a detailed spreadsheet or map associated with it for each and every sign. We had an internal working document, but it wasn't really clearly part of the council's adoption. We recognize the need for that, so that's part of the update that we'd like to present to you this evening. We have three main goals with the updates that we've made to the design standards for Panaway signage related to donations. First, we'd like to incorporate signage for the boardwalk and docks in Phase 2A and the Section Foreman House in Phase 2B. Second, we'd like to just reduce the visual impact of signage in Phase 1 for any new signage opportunities that we have. Of course, Phase 1 is Lake Street and the plaza nearby. And then third, just to better align the signage standards to the current fundraising goals of the Wayzata Conservancy. And we've learned a lot in the 2 years that we've been working through this. So we've had 2 city council workshops to look at these updates. We've had Wayzata Conservancy board meetings, and we've had this reviewed by the Panaway District Committee as well. So I'd like to bring up first to the Wayzata Conservancy, bring up the chair, Blake Sandvold, to give an introduction to HGA, who provide the specific updates. So I'll ask Mr. Sandvold to come forward.
Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for having me tonight. So, Mayor Mouton, council members, city staff, I'm excited to be here on behalf of the Wayzata Conservancy. So really going through updated design recommendations, and this has been a wonderful process, in collaboration with HGA, city staff, Civitas, Panaway District Committee, and many more for a number of years. So it's been a lot to get us to this point. And, this is something that we really do view as vital to our fundraising efforts. And as we look to future phases, I think this is a great leap start to get us to that point. And as we'll talk further on today, I think it's a great way to showcase the love that so many have for this wonderful community that is here. So, I mean, as Peter and I have been in conversations, that has been endless and coming out, which is absolutely wonderful, and, a great testament to the city that we're all creating together. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Samantha from HGA and give a couple words on what we've created here.
Good evening. If you could introduce yourself and provide your name and address for the record. And business address would be fine.
I'm Samantha Mendiola with HGA, and HGA's offices are located at 420 North 5th Street in Minneapolis.
Thank you.
All right, so tonight I wanted to just give a high-level look at the design standards that we've gone to further detail in developing for you all. This should look familiar in that this is the system that was developed to identify a comprehensive look at all of the signage in the area, looking back to the existing signage that you have, as well as looking forward to the developments at Panaway. We have two different materials that we've chosen, one for the more honorific signage, and then the other for the donor signage. And as well, the graphic that you see that is the kind of historic plat map of Wayzata. For the informational education and honorific signage, we haven't made any updates to that since the last time that was approved, but do want to keep it in the package so that you have a holistic picture. And where we've been focusing in the last few months is on the donor recognition and developing that signage further. What we have done is we've developed 5 tiers of signage that are set at a series of giving levels. Tiers 3 through 5, which start at just under $250,000 and go down from there, would be signage that would be set and would not have to come to the city council for any modifications. There wouldn't be modifications to that signage. We would note that on Tier 1 and Tier 2 signage, anything over that $250,000 mark, we have a sign type that, if needed, the city could review any minor modifications to those. So of the 5 sign types, you can see on this slide that we've started to design a series of signs. For the Tier 3 signs, we don't necessarily have a location for those yet in this current phase, but we feel that there will be opportunities for that tier of signage in Phase 3. So we don't have any designs developed quite yet for that, but it would be in alignment with the rest of the signage. I'll very highly go over each of these sign designs and just talk about how they fit into the context. This would be the overall project sign, named the Panaway Park sign, with the donor name listed underneath as a naming opportunity for the donor, but it is continued to be Panaway Park. Also, in working with the council workshops, we were talking about the number of signs, and you'll see those quantities listed near the end of this presentation. But one of the things that we did do was take a couple of the signs and combine them into a single sign so that it would allow for us to streamline how many signs you have, yet also get the donation amounts that would be needed to meet the requirements for the Conservancy. So this is Lake Street Plaza sign. This would be near the pergola. We also have the Sanville Lakeshore Learning Center bench near the Section Foreman House. We have a Fountain Plaza sign that is etched into the stone benches so that it's not going to be any type of a tripping hazard or anything for kids as they're running around barefoot in the water. We have a couple of garden bed and planter signs. So those are at 2 different giving levels, $50,000 and $25,000. Those would all be inset into the garden beds. And then we have applied plaques, and that means there is some existing infrastructure that Civitas has designed, whether it's the bench or the harvest table or the Adirondack deck chair, and those signs would then be applied to those pieces. We have an opportunity for dock posts. And then our opportunities on the boardwalk are naming the entire boardwalk, as well as some seating areas, 2 seating areas along the way. And then the boardwalk rail, this would be the rail that's facing the street, not the lake, would have names etched into it in a continuous line, kind of representing how the city members are coming together to support this effort. We did talk with council workshops about visualization and making sure that this doesn't feel like there are signs everywhere, that it's really integrated into the design of Panaway. So you can see here, there are no freestanding signs that are in an obstruction. They're all either set into a planter or into a planting bed. And then for the opportunities, I wanted to highlight, in working with the workshop, council workshop, we did reduce the number of signs. So the number of freestanding signs that you'll see here are 11, which is relatively minimal. The rest of them are applied signs, so on the benches, on the chairs, the tables, the dock posts. That accounts for 77 total signs. And then the rail engraving takes up the bulk of the donors. There are quite a few opportunities there. What we would do is we would start in the middle of the rail and we would build out from there. So you don't have to fill the whole rail, but there's an opportunity for that. And then I have maps here that we can discuss any location questions that you may have on the designs.
Excellent, thank you.
So, Mayor, we can take any questions that you have. The proposed motion for you this evening is to adopt Resolution 26, 2023. This would adopt the updated design standards as you see in your packet and completely replace in its entirety the standards that we had from 2021.
Excellent, thank you, Director Gellner. Questions of staff? Councilmember McDonald?
All right. Thanks, Mayor. Maybe this is better for Samantha, but on that very last slide you just showed us, you said 11 freestanding signs. Do the angled signs fall into freestanding? Or, okay.
Yep.
And can you offer some clarification on the dock post? I'm pretty sure that little circle on the top just falls on the top.
Yes, so it's a 9-inch diameter post, and we're still working with Civitas as they're developing the final designs for the docks. But the plan is to have that already with a stainless steel cover on it. So this would be like a cap, a stainless steel cap that just goes on the very top. And it doesn't fill every dock post. We have it on 26 of the dock posts.
And then just one last question on the naming for the lake walk. You have two examples. Thank you. The small one up at the top seems to have more words than the enlarged top view. Just curious which one it is.
It is the enlarged one. Thank you for catching that. So what we determined that plaque would say, it's actually a sketch that one of the community members created, and then it says enjoy the lake walk, and then there's an opportunity for 2 donor names. The little one on the top, we want to strike that little note. It just is the names, okay. No dedication to or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you, Councilmember McDonald. Councilmember Parkhill, yes.
So on the boardwalk rail, the etching on there and putting people's name on there, how is that going to look in 3 or 4 years when that railing and that wood starts to wear? Are we going to still be able to tell whose name? And in the workshop, we didn't address this as much as I think everybody wanted to because we ran out of time, and we quickly made the decision to sort of do a running name thing. And I'm just wondering if it's a good idea to allow you guys a moment to step back on that, but not stop this process, but take a step back and say, is there a better way to do that? And then give us some options. I'm just concerned that in 2 years, the weather is going to take those names out, I think. And also, having a bunch of stimulus kind of take, along the railing kind of takes away from the sereneness of the lake, maybe. So that's my thought and recommendation on that, is wanted to see what the other council members thought on that. My other thing, to give you guys a little more flexibility, would be to think about the Lake Street Plaza, and I know we changed that from 150 for the plaza, 100 from the east lawn, and 100 from the west lawn, and then made it 375, which to me is an odd number. And I'm just wondering, given that we only have one other or two other $100,000 gifts, I think there's only one at this tier, or it's not even in tier 2, it's in tier 3. What if we had the option of an east lawn, west lawn, and a plaza? So the east lawn was 100, the west lawn was 100, the plaza was 150, or somebody could buy the whole thing for 350. So that's my thinking. It gives them a little more flexibility, you know, instead of one big, has to be 375 and that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Parkhill. From my recollection from the workshop, though, there was concern with regard to having multiple signs and the center sign, which is why you went with the direction for the one center sign, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay.
Are you concerned about that? Or is it, you know, I'm just, I mean, we could have 0 signs if nobody pays the 375, right? So it's a big number.
It is a big number. I would say that, you know, if you look at the slide that's up right now, there are currently 2 opportunities in that tier 2, and in this phase of work, no opportunities in tier 3. So by adding the lawns back in, you are giving more opportunities. The opposite of that is then you have 3 signs versus 1 sign.
Could do them all on one sign though, right? One sign and say, you know, East Lawn, thank you this family, West Lawn, thank you this family, and Plaza, thank you this family, if it came to that.
Yeah, I think we could look at that. We also talked about in the workshop the opportunity of kind of placemaking and wayfinding with the east and west lawns. So that's something else to consider if you wanted to go back in that direction. So I think all of them are very viable and feasible options. I would maybe turn to the Conservancy to also check the numbers to make sure that they're getting, how they're feeling about the 375 for a donor, and that they would be getting the right donation amounts with 3 signs versus 1 sign.
Oh, that's a fair point. Let's circle back to that issue.
Okay.
All right. Just making a note. Yes, Councilmember Iverson.
Thank you guys for all your hard work. So help me, where is the central garden beds?
I will find the map for you. So in this plan, you can see there is a note that says existing Davis sign, and it has the purple dot, and that is the existing sign for the central garden bed.
So it's by the current sign that's out there right now.
Exactly.
It'd be up there, okay. Another thought to also consider, as I kind of look at the volume of signs for the dock post and I look at your margins, have you considered increasing from $1,000 to, or $1,500 to perhaps $2,500 or even $3,000, reduce the amount of post and have a higher margin on those?
I will note that the dock posts are probably the least developed of everything that we've done, knowing that Civitas is still in the process of designing that piece. So that margin is relatively unknown until we have a dock manufacturer on board and understand what we're working with and if they can potentially provide those caps, and we just need to etch them. So knowing that, I would say the margin is a little loose at this time, and we were conservative on how much we thought those might cost. And my guess is the cost will come down.
Okay. 'Cause
That doesn't
it's-
necessarily answer your question about what amount we should be charging for those.
Well, and that would be, I mean, for the executive director and the conservancy to make that determination based on what you feel you can raise for those types
Absolutely.
of things.
Yeah, completely correct, Mayor. And if I may add on that, from our workshop to today, we did increase the price from $1,000 to $1,500.
All that,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Again, I think you guys know that one of the things I'm just concerned about is sign noise, sign pollution. And as I'm looking through this, I'm just trying to look at some opportunities to reduce that. And that was one of the things that I just happened to notice, that there could be a potential opportunity there. And Jeff, I agree with you. I'd like to come back and talk about the railing. Because again, it was late in the meeting. Did I miss it? Did you guys ever put a sign, a sample sign into the gardens so we could actually see what the scale of that sign would look like?
We didn't put a physical sign in, but we did do this visualization. So you can see in the top two images, those would be the scale of the signs and the approximate placement of how they would fit within your existing garden beds.
There is an angled sign in one of the garden beds down there,
Yes, the 9/11 memorial sign is existing.
even further down.
Oh, and the Ramsden. Yep.
Okay, further down from that one, because the Ramstead one's kind of new too. Towards,
The Jacobs sign?
that's in a garden bed, correct? And how big is that
Can you
one?
go to the microphone, please, so we can hear you?
So, Peter Hitch from the I'm the executive director of the Wayzata Conservancy, and been working with this committee now for a bit of time. This, Council Member McDonald, I think you're asking about the sign for the Jacobs family.
Okay.
It's between two benches at the far west end of the plantings there. And it's down on the ground almost. It's about 6 inches high. And it's next to the Davis bench, next to the Jacobs bench, which has a applied sign on it also. Little sign.
How wide is that one? Do you know?
I don't know specifically, but I'm going to guess it's about 12 inches by 6 inches.
It's 18 inches by 8 1/4.
Good guess, Peter.
I knew it was bigger than 12.
So that would be one of our $25,000 garden
Yeah.
planter signs.
Okay.
Kathy, I'm sorry if I jumped in with.
No, not you didn't at all, but
Okay.
thank you, Molly, but no, you didn't.
This, just rolling into this part, is the garden bed angled signs is my sticking point for me. I think it's too many in that small square. I think 6 is too many right there. It looks big, but it's not. You can walk that in 1 minute. So it's just, they're too big, there's too many, and I don't think we need to put an angled sign in all of our planters and our gardens. The gardens seem to be still kind of taking shape. So I think they should grow in a bit more and see where we go. I know the Panaway District Committee is looking a lot at new plantings or diversifying plantings, and that's sort of been the hardest thing to wrap my head around, because I look at that existing one and think, oh my gosh, there's going to be 6 more. It's just too many.
Councilmember McDonald, do you know how many might feel more appropriate to you?
Well, if you go back to putting 3 more signs in the plaza, I would probably say 0. which I'm sure is not the answer you want, but, so a little bit of give and take there, so that's my answer.
Okay.
Here, can I just add on to that?
Yes, of course.
So, one of the things as I was preparing for this meeting and really wanting to come on board and support you guys and help you with your fundraising, it is important, is that perhaps we look at the process maybe just a tad different this time. Maybe we start with lower counts overall. Let's see how efforts go and come back. We can always add. My concern is if we start at a very high number, 113, I think I had 126 if we look at the whole park. We've started super high. I think I would rather see us start less, and then as your donations increase, then perhaps it's easier for us to come back and add, but it's going to be hard to subtract them. So I would feel more comfortable with that approach tonight versus just trying to get a large number out there today. Perhaps we scale back and we come back again next year and we review your efforts and your learnings and just review it. So that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Plekish, any questions?
Well, I'm just ruminating here a little bit on what's being said. We have already scaled it back quite a bit from the first plan. I don't remember the numbers, but the numbers we're at right now are dramatically lower than where we started, so we've already scaled back. And it's a bit of a balancing act. I mean, the number of opportunities to raise money versus the amount of money we'd like to raise, there is a balance, and there's no perfect answer here. I'm okay with the plan we've got right now because we've been part of many meetings to talk about where do we start, where do we want to end, and we ended here based on our last workshops. So I'm actually okay with it. And if ultimately successful and sold everything that was there, is that such a bad thing? Now, along the way, the biggest concern that we had, that I had certainly, was sign pollution. Did we have too many signs? That is still a general fear. Are we there? Are we still too many, or are we at the right number? I don't know, but we're not going to know until we start filling them in. So I'd be okay with scaling it back a bit with the idea we can come back and add some. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think we need to drastically reduce it because of where we are, because we already have.
Oh, I appreciate those thoughts. I do have a question with regard to Tier 3. To be offered in Phase 3, but do we have what that means in terms of signage?
Well,
Or is that still to be developed?
We designed those lawn signs, the east lawn and the west lawn signs. Those were Tier 3 signs at the $100,000 mark. So we could bring those back into the fold in Tier 3, obviously with a different name. So those have been designed. We just don't have a place for them currently.
So,
Mayor, I can clarify your question too, as well. about
please, if
Phase
you would.
3.
Yes.
So the Eco Park and the Depot Park are only in schematic design finished at this point. So when we engage in the final design process, we would work with the Conservancy again to update these standards again. So we're just not at that level of design for the Eco Park and Depot Park yet.
So we're looking at more signage.
For those phases, yes.
For those
Phase
phases.
3, correct.
And what I heard just now is potentially for Phase 3, east and west lawns, signage could come back?
I'll
did I
clarify.
misunderstand?
That sign type
Oh, sign type.
has
Pardon
been
me.
designed, but
Okay.
not necessarily.
Understood. No, thank you. Well, let's go back then to some of the things that probably threw the three of you into a tailspin. Because this is what we do. So at the last workshop, we've had at least 2, maybe 3, where we've given direction. And each time we've had numbers come down, we've had questions and concerns about placement and size and quantity, all of the above. want to talk about a couple of the concerns that were raised. One is with regard to the plaza signage, and by that, we have the one at the end of Broadway. Correct me if I misstate anything. At the end of Broadway was one. We had one at the end of Walker by the fountain, I believe was one that was
We-
proposed.
We did, and then in the latest workshop, we heard that that location would be problematic, so we've
Correct.
proposed a new location for that.
Yes, but I want to address Councilmember Parkhill's questions with regard to have, instead of one signage at 375, potentially having additional.
So that sign is the overall project sign, which is the $1 million donation amount.
Yes,
And then the sign that's at
at the fountain.
at the pergola
Oh, at the pergola, pardon.
is the Lake Street Plaza sign that Mr. Parkhill was referencing.
Okay. And so, Councilmember Parkhill, are you suggesting additional signs besides those two?
Well, I think better, the better idea is to put one sign with 3 acknowledgements. So the plaza sign has donation for the plaza, donation for the east lawn, and donation for the west lawn, and it's just one sign. And I think to Councilman McDonald's thought, the number of signs for the garden beds, why couldn't it just be one sign that acknowledges 6 families? Just, there, it is getting a lot of signs,
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
So
And-
consolidation.
Yes, and I think that Councilmember McDonald had noted that as an option during discussions. I don't remember if that was one of our kind of smaller group meetings or a larger council member workshop. Any thoughts on consolidation? A generalized plaque with 6 names versus individual placards?
I might ask you all how you feel that would be able to be sold to donors.
Would you like to, we have a viewing audience who would love to
I'll jump
hear
in.
your thoughts.
I'll jump in on this one.
Yes.
I do think that there would be more difficulty in selling that, to an extent, especially relative to others being out there in that type of manner. At that type of dollar threshold, I think it may be a more difficult thing for us to get out and fundraise against. I totally understand the thought of clutter, and I hope you can see with what we've done, we've tried to be very respectful and conscientious of that, but from a fundraising effort, I think it may be more difficult.
Okay. Thank you. And the individual garden signs, that's for what kind of donation amount?
There's a $25,000 and a $50,000.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So when we look at, so do you think that it would be difficult now because we've already moved in the path of the individual signage as opposed to one that has multiple names to be able to, it's difficult to unwind from that at this juncture?
Yeah, I think it could be a combination of differentiating between the two, but also for the people that we've talked to with the planters, it's been a more emotional attachment to a certain area and wanting to be close to an area for whatever reason may be helpful to them. So I think it's amazing how personal fundraising is, and when you're really out with that. And I think that's a wonderful thing to appreciate, but, most of the donors that we've come forward with, they've said, I feel passion with this type of spot, actually.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I may just weigh in again.
Of course.
If I were going to write a check for $25,000 or $50,000, I think I would like to say this is my garden bed. as opposed to asking for that amount of money and have it just be one of 6 names on a plaque somewhere. I think aesthetically, it also, to my eye at least, looks better. You could make it smaller, I mean, if we wanted to, but if you see a garden bed that has a little plaque in it that says this, you know, you can thank this family for this, to me, that feels a little bit better than finding another plaque somewhere else that says all the beds that you're looking at are supported by these 6 families. But again, if I was the donor, I'd kind of like to have my own little spot. If the sign is too big, we can decide to scale it back and make it aesthetically pleasing. When I go to places like the Arboretum and I see these little plaques in, you know, wherever it happens to be, I kind of feel good about it, that some family thought that this was their little plot that they wanted to connect with. So I think I'm okay with the way the plan is right now. And again, just to remind everyone that we started with a plan that was much more substantial than this. So, I mean, in a vacuum, this might look like it's got maybe too many, but it's way less than we used to have when we first started.
I'll say we had 339 when we started, and we have 77 today.
Samantha, would you put up your visualization slide once? I could probably get there if they were smaller. 18 inches, 16 inches, too big. It's too big. But I understand, you all make a good point about having a spot. But it's also a spot for a whole community too. And sometimes you just want to see the gardens. So I think there might be a compromise there somewhere. And
I'll weigh in on that too. I think there is. You know, I think a family that donates that kind of money, I don't know if they necessarily want an 18-inch sign. They just want a sign. And if it's a aesthetically pleasing one that's maybe a little bit less pronounced, I think families would be perfectly fine with that, frankly.
What, in terms of the size of the signage, we currently have 18 inches wide by 8¼ inches tall. Are you thinking, what size are you thinking? Do you think 12 inches, a foot?
No, that's Stanley Davis.
like this? I don't know. Yeah, like a recipe card size? Okay. Is that a size? An A6, A4, I don't know.
And do you want them sticking 2 feet up? I mean,
I think it should depend on what's planted there.
I think so too.
So again, I don't think these are all going to sell in one day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my general guess. So I think engaging the Panaway District Committee or city staff, like our city forester, oh my gosh.
Bennett?
Bennett.
Yes.
Thank you. That would be a smart move because there's also a long-term vision from the city end as well that should be considered.
Thoughts about reduction in size?
Yeah, I think that would be something we'd be comfortable with. I would want to add, Councilmember McDonald, that this was presented to the Panaway District Committee. So it was vetted there with a couple members. But yeah, we would be comfortable with that. I mean, I would personally, you know, if it was bigger, a little bit bigger than 8 inches, I think that would be nice just based off of the scale of it and, you know, some height. I don't know if it's a foot or something like that. That feels more compromise to me on that for sure.
Okay. I mean, not being designers, I'm not going to throw out that it has to be this size, but it sounds like it needs to be less than 18 inches. And to scale, right, in terms of width and height and.
Yeah, I think what we could do is we could take the proportions, which are nice proportions, and scale them down by half. So the 18-inch wide sign could go down to 9, and the 24-inch sign could go down to 12.
Sold.
Sounds very reasonable, thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. We're making progress. All right. So we aren't necessarily reducing the number, but we're reducing the size. And then boardwalk rail. So the material is, that's a man-made material
It's
made
like
from
an
natural material.
impregnated wood, so it's meant to be used on the exterior. It's meant to weather well, and so it's not going to be like a typical wooden boardwalk that starts to fade.
It's not going to turn gray.
Right.
on
It
us.
doesn't. It doesn't do that. So, to your question about in a couple of years, will it fade out? Will you be able to see it? It's a much more durable wood material, so it's not going to wear down and it's not going to fade out. So we're feeling pretty confident about those names being long lasting, etched into that material.
Is there, when the etching takes place, is there some kind of contrast, or is it the same color all the way through in the wood? I'm not familiar with this.
Currently, we're planning on it being the same color, having it be kind of CNC routed, which means you're just taking material away. We have looked at things like laser etching, which would require us to dig into it just a little bit more. We'd have to take the boards off-site and do something like that. That burns the material a little bit and gives it a bit of a darker tone. So there are things that we could look at to give it a higher contrast. But the thought right now was to keep it relatively quiet and have something be the same color all through it.
Has this been done before with this type of material?
Oh, yes.
Oh, it has.
Often.
Okay. And so the concerns, Councilmember?
I just expressed them. I mean, if this is the best way to go, that's fine, but is this on the top flat, or is this on the face of it that's gonna?
It's on the top, so you can, it's a little bit of an angle. So what's nice about that is you won't have standing water sitting on it. So that top cap kind of angles a little bit, and it's on that horizontal surface.
Okay. It just, anyway, I thought there might be a better way, and I didn't want to take away their marching orders at all, but I thought, well, if we kind of discussed it briefly, and if there is a better way, it'd be great to hear about it, so.
No, you're right, and this was part of the original proposal. We had some concerns initially with regard to the look and placement, and we looked at a couple of different options the last go-around. I think the consensus was that they liked the unity that it brought with all of the names. So we kind of did a full 360 on you. Yes, Councilmember Iverson.
Vandalism, how will that be addressed?
Each of these are 10-foot board lengths. So if there were an issue, that 10-foot board could be removed and replaced. Otherwise, it's a relatively durable material. Again, it's not just regular wood that people carve into. That's not to say that if you really had your mind set on it, you couldn't do something. But it's a relatively durable material. And if there were a major issue, it would be that single board that would need to be replaced.
And let's hope we don't get graffiti.
Yeah. Well, as we learned from our chief of police, they are really good at finding out who does that and holding them accountable. So, very good. I wanted to make sure we addressed any questions or concerns the council had on any of these issues.
The Lake Street Plaza, you guys want to keep it at 375?
Well, I'm going to leave it up to the Conservancy in terms of what dollar amount they feel they can sell that at. My bigger concern from a policy standpoint is the number of signs. I mean, they're charged with the task of raising the money. If they want to charge 10 million and think they can do it, 2 thumbs up. But so I will leave it to their
Okay.
expertise and discretion in terms of what the proper dollar amount should be.
Mayor, I know that they've brought the quantity down. But I'm still not comfortable with 100 and some signs and stuff. I know we have different types of signs. Signs will be on benches, signs will be on top, signs will be on fire,
I think
and
it's
planters.
77 now.
77 signs.
Oh, you said
77.
113 earlier.
We were at 113 at our last workshop. We brought it down to 77. We started at 339, and we've whittled it down each time we've met with you down to 77.
Okay, so when I did the count of what's in front of me today on page 133, I have 126 signs, but again, that also has the Eco Park, so it's inclusive of all the parks.
This is the phase 1 and phase 2 signs, as we haven't necessarily designed Depot or Eco Park yet.
But you're allocating, you've got, so I'm just going down on this document with quantities, excluding the 735. And I came up with 126 signs.
Is this the page
That's
that you're looking at?
document, yes.
Yep. So everything that's in gray is Depot Park and Eco Park. So those have not been placed. They're signs that we've been talking about, but they're not designed or placed yet. So,
But I'm also looking inclusive of what potential could be there. And my concern is, it's a lot of signs. You might come back once you get to those and ask for more. And that's why I said, could we do a phased approach to look at, can we start with less and add? Again, if we have this number, I don't feel we can go back, because you guys are going to go with marching orders to sell those. And again, I may be the only one who feels that, but I still think it's just too many signs. When you walk it, it's not that large of a plaza. So that's just my comments, and I feel that way. I had mentioned, Peter, I had mentioned that there is please don't talk behind my back. The bathroom is an unused space, an empty wall. And I don't know if you guys talked about that at all, but it's a blank canvas that perhaps you could put plaques up. And I don't know if you talked about that, but it could be a potential fundraising opportunity for you, and I would love to see you explore that. We could put some planters underneath it. It could really be beautified. And so, again, that's up to your committee, but I think it's an opportunity that perhaps you could look at.
So, Councilmember Iverson, the proposal before us is for 77 signs or signage of in some form or fashion for phases 1 and 2. 40 applied, 11 freestanding, and 26 dock posts. This is on page 134. What would your recommendation be?
Well, I'm sorry, Mayor. I mean, honestly, I mean, I don't know if half, I would need to actually study and work with you guys to do that. Having a skill to visualize things is a curse and a blessing. And when I walk down there, I just see it's a lot of signage. Maybe we start with half and we add. And maybe I'll feel different once I see it implemented. But it's a lot. In my opinion, being in the business, it seems like a lot of signs. I'd love to see you come back in 6 months if you're having success in a year. And I'm personally just more comfortable adding. I don't think, again, that we would ever subtract. But I'm one of 5 sitting here tonight, so.
Okay, so I am concerned long-term for the vision of the whole project, right, as we go into phase 3. If we get to the point of selling, or not selling, of raising the funds to have 77 applied or installed signage, it's a good problem to have, right, at that juncture. But we do have to continue to be incredibly cognizant of those. And, you know, in the time that we have had the first phase of Panaway, we have a mere 4 signs, I think, you know, besides, and one of them is the Native American burial site sign. So with that, I don't think it's going to be tomorrow that we're going to have, boom, all of these signs. And frankly, we're going to have our work cut out for us. And the Conservancy, if it gets to be and feel like it's too much, I mean, this council or future councils may say, we've got an issue, we've got to punt, we've got to figure something else out, but it's not working. So I think we need to just be very cognizant of that if we move forward. That, and that is going to be a very, very difficult thing to do because, as you said, people are very passionate, but ultimately we're the ones that make the decision for, you know, those spaces and the city. So we can unwind things as much as we roll things out. So. But I don't think, I share your concern. I do think, and I'm very grateful for the work that's been done to go from the original number. And many of these will be, you know, the majority of these are going to, A, be reduced in size, which they've agreed to, and also applied in such a way that they are not three-dimensional. It's a one-dimensional, or is it one-dimensional? Two-dimensional application.
It's thick.
That thick. Okay, 1.5.
So, Madam Mayor, if I may make another observation here.
Yes, of course.
Again, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we did start way higher than this number. Of the 77, which to some people might seem like a lot, to me, relative to 330, it's not that many. But here's a perspective. Roughly half of that 77 are dock posts and Adirondack chairs. You're not adding any new structure. They're already there, and unless you actually look at a post, you won't even know if there's a name on it. Unless you actually look at Adirondack chair, you won't know whether it does or doesn't have a plaque unless you get right up to it. That is not adding any clutter whatsoever. So really what we're talking about is a few dozen, maybe at most, of adding something that isn't there now. So it's a very manageable number, in my view.
Well, I mean, we have less than a dozen. We have 11.
Yep.
4 that are already, so we're adding 11 potentially throughout the entire space.
I think the applied signs are really quite attractive. The ones on the benches look really good down there.
Yeah.
Could they do that for the planters? The
I
applied
thought about saying that, but I wondered if you guys' heads would explode. So have you thought of?
Anything's possible.
I can get behind that.
Just from a, could we put the picture up of the, not to, of the, I don't remember the visualization slide, please?
Absolutely.
People will stop reading them when there's too many.
Yeah, that's true. And two, I think sometimes we forget, well, we don't forget, but we don't have any plantings or any foliage in the winter. And that was another reason why I'm grateful that you're scaling them down and significantly too. I do walk the Panaway in the winter quite a bit, and I'm not the only one out there. And it's nice to see the quiet of the lake and not be bombarded by 24 and 18-inch signs.
So the planters in question, is the suggestion that something would be applied on the face or
face of the stone here, possibly. It's more subtle, but, you know, these guys need to make sure they can sell it, I guess, but I don't see the big difference between that and it is softer. And that's kind of my issue with the railing too. It's kind of visually a lot going on.
Was that ever a consideration in terms of an application to the garden planters?
It was something that we talked about at HGA and thinking about the hierarchy of the donor amount. So on the benches, it's a $5,000 donation amount for the plaque. And since this was a $25,000 upwards of $50,000 donation, we felt like it needed to have a stronger presence, which is why we ended up using the kind of the freestanding sign within the planter. I think it's a beautiful application. That was why we went in that direction, was to be thinking about the scale of donation amount.
Sure. Okay.
Makes sense.
It does make sense. Okay, well, any other questions or thoughts? No? All right. So we need to go back to the other slide, and that is, where is my stuff? All right, seeing that there, does anybody want to share their thoughts overall? I mean, we have talked about this kind of at length, or instead, make a motion to consider adoption of Resolution 2023, adopting the updated Panaway design standards.
Are we in discussion or a motion?
I'm asking if somebody would like to discuss, or
Well,
alternatively.
I'll make a motion, which we, I guess, then can discuss, but I will make a motion that we adopt this as it is, with the exception that the garden signs will be scaled down, as we had discussed. I think it was 18 down to 9 and 24 down to 12 with the appropriate dimensions, with that one change for all those signs, but we keep the same number of locations. So I'll make that motion, and I would like to also add the editorial comment that, you know, roughly half of the signs we're talking about at 77 don't add anything. They're just adding names to the existing structures, so it's not really eye clutter at all.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded. Further discussion? Nope. No. Okay.
Madam Mayor, just a procedural point of clarification.
Yes.
The number of this draft resolution is number 2623, I believe. Did I get that right, staff?
Yes.
And so that's what's on the table with the modification that Councilmember Plekish made to the size.
Thank you. Did I misread that previously?
I didn't hear it in the motion, Madam Mayor. Just
Oh, certainly.
clarification.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Seeing that there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. All right. That motion passes. Okay, still under new business, our next item is to consider Resolution 28-2023, accepting Panaway donation of $500,000 from the Carish Family Fund and approving naming, dedication, and signage for Panaway Boardwalk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this is a great segue coming from this past action item that was just approved to it seeing or it being implemented in real time. So Director Gellner is going to walk us through this item, this exciting item.
Yes, thank you. So we discussed the policy for naming and dedicating city-owned land and facilities in our last items. I won't go into that in detail, but I will just provide a little bit more context about the guiding principles that are in that policy. Just a reminder that the City Council has sole authority to approve installations to name and rename facilities in the city under this policy, and it is the city's general policy to retain existing names of city-owned facilities, particularly if it has a regional significance. For example, we've discussed how the name Panaway would stay with this project over time. A donation shall not create an obligation for the city to name a facility after the donor. And then lastly, that the cost of the signage is borne by the donor or the organization sponsoring their quest. So we do have a presentation here briefly from the Wayzata Conservancy of a $500,000 donation proposal from the Wayzata Conservancy from the Karish Family Fund. And just note that it'll include a request to rename the boardwalk as the Lake Walk and include signage that we'll note on the following slide. So I'll request that Chair Sandvold come forward and just provide a brief note on this donation.
Wonderful, thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Sandvold.
Thank you for having us again. Yeah, so this is a wonderful donation that we're looking at, and the Karish family, I think, as many know, are long embedded in the city, and have come forward with immense care, and it's a wonderful story with family involvement on prior revisions of the Lake Walk Boardwalk, and Peter has curtailed many of the conversations on this in the recent year with his involvement with the Conservancy. And the Karish family has generously come forward with this gift. Peter, I don't know if there's any additional comments that you want to make on that.
Thank you very much. We are very pleased to have this donation sitting before us. You have to understand how it works also, in that the Karish family, in order to get a tax deduction and make this work for them, need to work through the Minneapolis Foundation. And so the Minneapolis Foundation is actually proposing the donation out of the Karish Family Fund, which they are going to bring together for us. And for me, this was something that I started over a year ago, speaking with Stacy to start with, and then later with her brother David, with respect to their relationship with the city, and more importantly, the nod to their Uncle Jerry, who came up with the name the Lake Walk back in 1994. And he put together a nonprofit back then to do this same thing, but unfortunately, was not, the nonprofit raised some money to do this. In fact, it was $2.5 million to get this done back then, but the railroad didn't want us to cross the tracks. And so unfortunately, the effort died back in actually it died in 1994. And so it's been sort of back there as something that's been behind this gift for a long time, obviously. Almost, that would make, 30 years now? We brought it back and talked about it this summer, and the family got together and said they would like to do this, and they would like to give this nod in history to Jerry's Lake Walk. And as I've talked around the city with people about this idea, that name seems to ring very nicely for them. And it does for me too, as it is on the lake, as opposed to a boardwalk up on the shore like the old one was back in 1906. It's been a nice opportunity for me to get to know this family and see how much they are invested in the city, and I think this is proof of that. And what I'd like to be able to do, obviously, is celebrate this donation and take it further now that we would have it. It will be a encouragement to other donors. It'll be an opportunity for us to work with the Minneapolis Foundation, to work with other Wayzata families, and to bring donations like this to the project. So that's why it's presented, and I'm hoping that it can be approved tonight.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Hitch.
Great. So I have one image too to show you as well. I believe this was this an image that Jerry drew? Is that correct? Or he was part of the ideation?
He didn't draw it. He had it drawn as a part of his original project.
Okay.
And if you look at it, it's extremely similar to what has come up with. And in 2014, when the framework was put together, the same sort of thing with a boardwalk on the lake was put together by the citizens. So this has been in the city's mind for a long time, and it will be, in my mind, we will finally get this dream for all of us to walk along the lake. And can you imagine walking along the lake as opposed to on the other side of the railroad tracks? I think it's really spectacular.
Mm-hmm. So Mayor, just to summarize what's in the proposal, again, it does include the request to rename the boardwalk as the Lake Walk. And then also includes the signage that was part of the design standards in the last item as well, with the wording below, and then space for a potential second family or organization to donate an additional $500,000, so that John and Jane Smith Family Trust, that's just a placeholder at this time. So I just have a couple slides to, for your consideration. So the request was made to the Wayzata Conservancy in writing. That's part of the procedure that we have here. And then the city council should consider the request and approve or deny it based on the following criteria. You're looking for any implications or effect of the proposed naming in association with the city in Panaway, and conduct appropriate due diligence on the request. We want to ensure that we don't have duplication or confusing similarity of names. That should be avoided. We want to consider the geographic location, historic or cultural significance, natural or geological features of the area to be renamed. In this case, it's from boardwalk to lake walk. And then the areas should only be named in connection with a donation that is over $50,000, which this surely is. So those are some things to consider. And then the motion is a little long, so it's to adopt a resolution 28, 2023. It's accepting the Panaway donation of $500,000 from the Wayzata Conservancy on behalf of the Karish Family Fund, and then also approving the naming and dedication and signage shown here for the Panaway Boardwalk, which would become Lake Walk.
Fantastic, thank you so much. All right, questions, anyone? No? Well, I would like to, before I turn this over for a vote of the council, to personally thank the Conservancy, Mr. Hitch, for all your hard work, and certainly to the Karish family. It is an incredibly generous donation. It is exciting to see the many iterations of a lake walk, boardwalk. I mean, I think Director Gellner found something from the early 1900s. So it has been in people's minds that for over 100 years. And we are getting to that point, and through this very generous and thoughtful gift, we are incredibly grateful as a city and as a community, as a whole. And if John and Jane Smith Family Trust is out there, we have a space ready to go. We just saying. But anyway, so thank you. Thank you for your pursuit of these donations and for seeing it come to fruition. Very much appreciated. All right, then would someone care to make a motion to adopt Resolution 28-2023 accepting Panaway donation of $500,000 from the Wayzata Conservancy on behalf of the Karish Family Fund and approving the naming, dedication, and signage for Panaway Boardwalk?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Plekish, and a second.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Parkhill. The motion's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Thank you very much. All right. Seeing that we are still under new business, I think this is our final item. And that is to consider approval of the first reading of Ordinance 826, approving zoning text amendments for definitions and performance requirements chapters. City Manager.
You, Madam Mayor, I think, is Assistant Planner Coral going to start out with this one, or Director Gellner, are you?
She is going to start the presentation, but I have a little fun fact. When I was interviewing Ms. Corrals for this position, she talked about being very interested in zoning text amendments, and I took notes. And I was very excited that she was very excited. And so she's done a great job presenting these in the past, and I am very confident that this will be a great presentation. We're excited to do this tonight, so thanks.
We are very thankful for you.
I can't confirm or deny whether I was lying to get a job in that exact moment, but I am so excited for these, our most interesting text amendments.
If only you knew how excited we are as well.
I'm so glad we're all so excited. So today we're going to be checking out some text amendments to what I affectionately call our leftover chapters within the zoning code. It's chapters 902, 916, 917, 919, and 920. There we go. So if you recall, last summer, we did a big reorganization of our zoning code with Ordinance 811. That generally pertained to our zoning districts chapters, so our R1s, R2s, all the way up to R5. And the main product that came out of that was the new use table in Chapter 937, which in the last couple of months of usage has been a really great addition. So really glad we have that. But with that, with our overall simplification of the zoning code means that we need to go back and look at some of our other chapters and make sure that everything continues to line up with our newly simplified formatting. So the chapters that we're looking at today include 902, which is called Rules and Regulations, but generally actually has most of the definitions for every other chapter in the zoning code. 916, which is our general building and performance requirements. 917, which has to do with accessory things. 919, general yard, lot area, and building regulations, and then 920, which has to do with parking. And the general goal of this work was to, again, reduce conflict, both between all of these chapters and between our current zoning districts and our new use table, to continue to promote usability for both the public and for staff, to implement all these best practices as we look at a code that has gone through many iterations over the decades, and then most importantly, to advance the city's goals. For a little bit of context on the review timeline for these items, the zoning task force first looked at them in September of 2022, and then once more in January of 2023. The Planning Commission held a workshop on the items on March 3rd, and then had their public hearing a month later. And then, of course, we'll be looking at them twice, as there will be the first and second reading of the ordinance. There were changes made between almost every meeting of each of these groups. Everybody had really good feedback on both how to use it, both as homeowners and as members of the public, and then also what could make it more clear for staff, and then eventually for you, the City Council. And then a quick shout out to our members of the Zoning City Task Force. We have our esteemed City Council members, along with our planning commissioners, folks from the HRA and from Energy and Environment, and then our incredible members of the community who are just there because they like zoning, which is very, very cool. So what I'm going to be doing with our highlights here is you have the red lines in your packet. You also have a clean copy. There's a lot of changes. What I'm mostly going to be doing is giving the highlights, and then happy to answer questions of both what I talk about in this presentation, and then also anything that you, the council, see within the red lines that you'd like to talk about as well. So to start, one of the flaws in our definition chapter was that we didn't have any definitions for a gym at all. If you may notice that we have many gyms in Wayzata, so it made sense to assign those a definition. We decided to break it out into two separate definitions. The first is for personal fitness club. This is the most common type of gym we see throughout Wayzata. It's those gyms that are under 3,000 square feet. They tend to be that boutique style. And then a separate category for those gyms that are more of like a health club, corporate type of use, your LA Fitnesses, your Planet Fitnesses, those much larger facilities. We wanted to make sure that there was a difference in our code between those boutique gyms that we see a lot more often and those more corporate centers. There might be a potential district separation in the future. For instance, we might look at maybe allowing more of the boutique gyms on Lake Street, but then more of the corporate gyms further north in town. These have the same parking standards per the Planning Commission's recommendation. When we first went to the Planning Commission and to the Zoning Task Force, we had separate parking standards for each of these. We were thinking of having additional parking per square foot allotted for the health club. The Planning Commission came back and said, we don't really see a big difference between the per square foot demand between the larger facilities and the smaller facilities. So we're back to a single parking standard for both of these. And then one thing I want to note about these definitions that you'll see throughout the red lines is that we give a lot more examples within the definitions of things that might fit that particular definition. So you'll see for personal fitness club, we talk about, some kinds of studios, small gyms, boutique classes, or for health club, we talk about having those larger sort of sporting facilities. And that's a theme we have throughout the rest of the zoning code, or at least throughout our definitions, because that's not something we have a lot of now. And we've noticed that usability is a lot easier for staff, especially staff 10, 15, 20 years in the future, if they have an idea of what we were thinking when we put together these definitions. So that's the purpose of the examples. Personal services is another example of this. You'll see the beginning of the definition has been made a lot more applicable to a lot of different kinds of personal services. But then again, we've added those examples to say, you know, when you think of a personal service, it's going to be something like a hair salon, massage, tanning spa, similar uses. And the purpose behind amending this definition was to encompass a lot of similar uses with similar impacts. That's always our aim when we look at different zoning definitions, is to consider how each use impacts the area around it versus some of the really minutia differences of how some of those operate. And then to account for future market changes. Right now, personal services look to us like hair salons, massage, and spas, but in Wayzata, there is a fairly booming wellness industry, and so we can't always predict exactly what personal services might look like. So keeping that definition flexible for the future. Places of assembly is similar but a little different. This replaces church within the zoning code, and it's been changed to a building or portion of a building used or designed for the gathering together of 50 or more people for the purposes of meetings, conferences, a couple of other purposes. The idea is that this is non-discriminatory towards religious versus non-religious gatherings. Again, when it comes to impact, it's more important to us that a group of, say, 50 or more people are meeting on a regular basis and having those parking impacts, event type impacts. It doesn't really matter to us whether they're gathering for a religious reason or not from a zoning perspective. This definition also has the added bonus of being inclusive of all faiths, because not all religions gather in something that they would call a church. And then, again, with that non-discriminatory nature towards religious versus non-religious gatherings, that's also compliant with federal law that was passed, I think, more than 2 decades ago at this point, called RLUIPA. And this has to do with zoning and how it pertains to places of gathering, like a church. Yes, Mayor?
So I have a question about this in particular, and this may likely be for the city attorney. So if we were to get an application for someone under the places of assembly definition, but I'm holding conferences, right? I'm not under the guise of a church or a place of worship, but I'm holding conferences. Am I still, as a city, as I'm reading places of assembly, to me, that holds a special protection under zoning, that if I'm a place of assembly for a conference or a meeting, that I wouldn't be entitled to? I don't know where my question's going with that. But do you kind of see what I'm saying? We have to make certain accommodations for a church or a place of worship when it comes to zoning, correct?
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's generally true.
Okay.
But we can't exclude religious uses under RLUIPA.
Okay. However, when I read this definition, a place of assembly is 50 or more people who gather for a meeting. That to me is almost a conference center. How are we differentiating between 50 or more people for the purpose of a meeting or a conference, like a conference center, and a place of worship or a church, who are afforded special protections that a conference center or a meeting center would not be afforded?
I'm trying to think how best to answer your question, Madam Mayor. The city, I think as Planner Quarles said, what we want to do as a city is treat all applications or applicants and land uses the same regardless of what's going on there, whether it's religious or not, thinking about the impacts of what's going on. So I think that's what's behind this change in definition. And so it's inclusive of religious gatherings, folks that would assemble for religious gatherings. But it doesn't have to be a religious purpose there. It could be something else.
Should it be inclusive, though, I guess is my question.
You're saying, should it be?
Should it be?
I think so. In other words, it's not exclusive of religious uses. It includes that, and includes other kinds of uses. And then when you think about sort of the special protections that you're talking under RLUIPA, there's a lot of elements to that law, but basically we need to just be careful that our laws don't have the effect expressly or as a result of excluding religious uses. And so to me, this change doesn't run afoul of that because it's really going in the other direction of that. It's making things more inclusive.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you.
Great. Moving on, this is an interesting one. Service commercial is a term that is already in our code and has been in there for quite some time. Within the C4, C4A, and C4B zoning districts, which are along Lake Street, you'll see the following language, and it says at least 50% of the building frontage on the ground floor along Lake Street must be used for retail or service commercial use and must comprise at least 50% of the ground floor building footprint. We have a strong definition for retail within our code. We did not have really any definition for service commercial within our code. And so when evaluating new buildings along Lake Street or new buildings that are proposing maybe a change in tenancy along Lake Street, we were having to use our best judgment as to what service commercial meant. And so we felt it was best to add that definition into the code. And so we've decided to define that as the sale of services, which may include the limited sale of related goods, on the premises to the general public by appointment or by walk-in. I've highlighted those particular words because the idea is to promote foot traffic. These are uses that we want people to be going to in person, because the purpose of that provision in that C4 family of districts is to get people to come to those buildings on Lake Street. And so we wanted to create a definition that was a little bit flexible. There are a lot of, different types of uses that may be able to promote that sort of in-person visiting of the office, but still specific enough to note we don't want a use that is just an office that never has anybody coming to it, because that's not necessarily what we want Lake Street to be, is all office. It is inclusive of certain office uses, but those are those uses that provide services to walk-in customers, which is important. And overall, this is intended to clarify the existing priority of this provision in the C4 family of districts exists to bring people to Lake Street into those new buildings. In 916, fairly limited changes, especially changes that most people are interested in. It's a pretty dense chapter. In there is the definition of traffic visibility triangle. The traffic visibility triangle is when you're in your car and you're taking a right turn and you go, oh my gosh, I can't see around the corner. It's because there's something in the traffic visibility triangle. So that definition was very long and very tough to understand, so we simplified that. Councilmember Plekish knows because he was on the task force.
Still didn't get it.
There's been some discussion over the height of allowed items within the, it's a typo, within the height of allowed items within the triangle. And we can continue to discuss that. Some discussion about whether that should be 3 feet or 30 inches, a difference of 6 inches. And then within 916, we also added some language giving some permitting authority for grading and drainage to the city engineer's office as a whole instead of only the city engineer, because we have plenty of qualified people within the city engineer's office who could sign off on a permit for grading and drainage activities. I just wanted to take a quick note before we moved into 917 and 919 about the difference between a conditional use permit and a variance. For conditional use permits, these are uses that are, not necessarily permitted by right, but can be if certain conditions are met. They're only for uses that are specifically listed in the ordinance, and they're for things that you would commonly see as exceptions. They pop up a lot. When the Planning Commission and Council make findings of approval and denial for CUPs, they're looking at the effects of the land use on the surrounding area, compatibility, and the comp plan. Versus a variance, it's a specific review process for if you're trying to exceed some sort of dimensional standard. Basically saying, hey, if you strictly applied this requirement, I would be dealing with some sort of practical difficulty. Both our code and state law are pretty specific about what a practical difficulty is, meaning that the proposal is reasonable but not permitted, the proposal does not alter the essential character, and most importantly, that variance is needed due to the unique circumstances of a property. So for CUPs, these are things that come up often. It might be on a standard or non-standard lot, and there's a little bit more lax set of criteria as opposed to a variance, which is a much stricter process, and you have to be showing that your property is special among other properties. I bring this up because in 917 we had a lot of CUPs. This is a chapter that generally deals with accessory buildings, which is often something that gets added after the fact. For a property, whether that's, the first time you're building a detached garage or some sort of modification. But in general, this chapter looks at how accessory buildings relate to other buildings on the property, generally the main house. Every CUP in this chapter is now a variance. And this, again, harkens back to the difference between a CUP and a variance. A lot of the CUPs in this chapter specifically related to dimensional standards. It was basically saying if you wanted to have a garage of a certain size, or you wanted to place something over a setback line, those sorts of things. And we're, at this point, in terms of best practice, we use variances for those, and it made sense to continue to use those for this process, or for accessory buildings, because that should be relating back to whether your property is experiencing something unique, which is how we tend to talk about variances. Every section had some sort of edit for clarity. A couple were removed where they were redundant. One section to mention is section B, a fairly convoluted provision saying that within some of our larger zoning districts, a garage not exceeding 1,000 square feet shall be considered an integral part of the principal building if it is attached to the principal building or is connected to it by a covered passageway, and such garages are exempted from the provisions of this subsection. That is long and confusing, and it is long and confusing for the public and for reviewers, meaning the council and the planning commission, and for staff. Looking back in our records, this has continued to be confusing for some years. So, we really took a hard look at it, thought what could the goals and the desired outcome of this provision have been? We could not come to a conclusion that we all agreed on for this one. It talks about size. We have lot coverage, impervious surface, and another provision in 91703 to regulate size of accessory structure, and so we have removed it. And I just wanted to call that one out because that's one that we've talked about in the past, and we're making the decision to remove it. In 91708, those were the CUP standards. Because we no longer have CUPs in this section, they're out. In 919, this section has not changed a whole lot, and I only highlight it because we had proposed some changes to the task force, and they elected not necessarily to go with them. This is for those items that tend to poke out above a roof, whether that's a chimney, a belfry, maybe some sort of cell equipment, elevator, penthouses, those sorts of things. I'll read that just for your reference. The building height limits established in each zoning district shall not apply to the following list of uninhabitable items. We added uninhabitable, except that no such structural element may exceed 40 feet in total height or exceed the maximum height of the building by more than 5 feet, whichever is greater, except by conditional use permit. I highlight 5 feet because the task force talked about whether to keep this at 5 feet or potentially lower it to 3 feet. The decision was made to stay at 5, principally for elevator penthouses, which are not really that useful. If they're only 3 feet tall, you need a little bit more room for that stuff. And then, except by conditional use permit, we talked about whether maybe a variance or a conditional use permit made more sense for these, based on those criteria that we talked about earlier. But hard to pick a practical difficulty for a lot of these. You're not necessarily asking for a spire on your building because you have a unique property. You might more likely to be asking for a spire because you're a church or something along those lines.
What if you ask for a belfry? I'm kidding. I'm teasing you.
I would have to learn more about what a belfry is. That one kind of got by me.
I hope to have a day where I get to request a belfry. I'm just saying. Could you touch on communication, reception, and transmission devices currently? What do we currently require, and is there a change from what's proposed here?
So for communication devices, there's no change proposed. This is proposed to be the same, and it is continuing to be limited to either that 40-foot height total or 5 feet taller than the roof, whichever is greater. And
in the same locations, correct? We
still
specified-
regulated in all of the same ways that we regulate rooftop mechanical equipment, yes.
Excellent, thank you.
And then our only other change to this list was to add minarets or spires and to take out that word church, kind of in line with our discussion about places of assembly. Average grade plane, a concept all of us know and love. Basically, the idea of when we talk about the height of a building, how do we set 0? This is a definition in the past that has been really confusing to builders, and so one that They generally have to come to staff on it and ask, how do I do this? As a personal rule of 9, if someone asks me how to do something 5 or 10 times, it's probably an issue with our code. So part of what we've done is simplify that definition, but also add a diagram just in the code, because we can do that. So the diagram on the screen there basically shows that when you measure the average grade plane, you draw a line that's a little farther out than the edge of the building. And within that area, around the edge of the building, you're going to want to go to the lowest point. And sometimes that lowest point is out at that line, and sometimes it's close to the building, and sometimes it's in the middle. And the idea is to keep people from building little pedestals to put their buildings on, in essence. So hopefully that diagram helps quite a bit. And then we also added that clarification about when you calculate an average, when you're placing a bunch of points in order to create that average, try not to mess with those points too much. We really only want them about 20 feet apart horizontally, as opposed to, 2 points that are 100 feet apart and then a bunch of points that are all really close to each other. That's gaming the system, and we're trying to cut down on that. For parking, one of the things I want to be really specific on is we only changed one section in 920. As much as I would love to overhaul the entire parking chapter, we did not do that. We only changed 920.11, which is the table of how much parking is required for each use. And this was really important because our new use table in Chapter 937 that was approved last summer has a lot of consolidated uses or changes in uses or more specific definitions, and that has to match up with everything that's in this table. So we wanted to make sure that those corresponded to the correct parking standards. For certain uses, we wanted to look at creating more flexible and precise ways to calculate parking, and then really doubling down on using the most current data wherever possible. Our consultants at WSB were a massive help throughout this entire process, but especially for parking, both because they have access to all of their traffic engineers and the Institute of Transportation Engineering and all of that sort of thing, and then also because tons of their staff have worked in many cities and have a better idea of what some of those best practices are and can pass them along to us. So a couple of those changes to outline. Car wash showed up a bunch of times throughout the table. We simplified that to whether you have just a car wash or an accessory car wash. Just to note that those are also regulated by CUP standards. For personal services, I mentioned that we had a fresh definition for that earlier. That's now 1 space per 200 square feet. We used to base that on the number of working stations. So for instance, if you had a salon and there were 6 working stations, I think it was 2 or 3 spots per working station. We wanted to make it a little more flexible for those personal services which might not have stations. So we know a hair salon has, specific numbers of stations, but something like a massage parlor might not. So we wanted to make sure that that was inclusive of all of those uses that now fall under personal services. And then what this also does is make it a little bit more flexible for staffing changes over time, where your number of workstations might change. For indoor recreation, we had a bunch of uses like bowling alleys and similar uses. Bowling alleys, for instance, had a standard based on the number of lanes in the establishment. But as we were thinking through, we were like, okay, we've got bowling alleys. Let's think about all the other ways that people can do indoor recreation. Turns out there are so many. And some of them are uses that might pop up in Wayzata over the years. Some of them are uses that will never be here. So we figured that it was pretty tough to predict parking demand for every single one of those uses. Especially as some of those uses mix. Like you might have a bowling alley that has an arcade or has something else, and so we wanted to be a little bit more flexible. And by flexible, I mean we now have no parking standard listed for this. There is a section at the end of the parking table that says if you've got a use that isn't in this parking table for some reason, give us a parking study, show us how much parking you think you need, and staff will consider that and amend it and approve it as needed. And so we decided that indoor recreation, broad as it is, made a little bit more sense to go under that more personalized parking determination as opposed to trying to guess all of the different ways that people can do indoor recreation. And then I believe this is the last one for parking, food and beverage establishments, restaurants. This is one that has come up in front of the Planning Commission and Council many, many times, and it's because, like indoor recreation, There are a lot of ways to do food. There are a lot of ways to arrange and lay out your restaurant, and a lot of them have different potential demands on parking. Our current standard is at 15.2 parking spaces per 1,000. That origin's a little unclear. I mean, it kind of falls within the Institute of Traffic Engineers manual for restaurants, but kind of. And then it's really designed for full-service restaurants, which we have quite a few of in Wayzata, but we also have a lot of other kinds of food and beverage establishments here. In particular, that 15.2 parking space standard is really tough for smaller establishments, or those that have larger kitchens, less seating, or for our takeout-only restaurants, also really, really high for the number of employees that they would actually have in such a space. So when we were looking at this parking standard, our goal was not to reduce the parking standards overall. When we look at our current slate of restaurants and apply this amended standard to them, it really doesn't change it all that much, but what it does is allow us to have a little bit more of a precise way of calculating what the actual parking need is for a lot of different types of restaurants. I have a note about a class system. When the zoning task force first saw this, we were trying to divide it up by class 1, 2, and 3 restaurants. That was sort of our first stab at it. And then I had the joy of making a spreadsheet of all of Wayzata's restaurants, and it was really hard to actually categorize them in that way, to break them out into 3 really clean categories. So what we've shifted to is a system that basically says, okay, most restaurants have a seating area, some restaurants have a bar area, and every restaurant has a kitchen. So let's consider what the actual parking demand of each of these spaces tends to be. For the seating area, that's kind of in the middle, that's a little bit higher than that's a little bit lower than what that 15.2 per 1,000 tends to be. For your bar area, that's the highest parking standard because everybody can stand, be very close, it can get pretty packed in a bar area. And then the kitchen area, as well as all other areas, the hallways, bathrooms, that sort of thing, that's 1 space per 150. And I mentioned that this is data-driven because this is based on actually how a lot of other cities do it within the Twin Cities. There's quite a few municipalities that break it down like this, and it's proven to be a lot more precise of a way to calculate parking standards as opposed to just that straight 15 per 1,000, which again is burdensome for certain kinds of restaurants. Yes.
So the trend now in restaurants, or has been for some time, is that you have a little bit of mixed use. You know, before you had a bar that was clearly delineated a bar, but now you have tables and seating. So are the tables that are technically in the bar area part of the bar calculations, or how will staff determine that?
Yes, so whenever someone comes through with a plan for a new restaurant or a change in restaurant, that's something that's going to come in front of us as part of the building permit process. And in that case, that might be a little bit more of a discussion with the restaurateur, whoever is submitting the building permit, as to, functionally what's the bar and what isn't. The nice thing is that the difference between the seating area and the bar area isn't that huge. It's that 35 square foot difference. So if there are adjustments in what is really considered the bar and what is really considered seating, that's not going to have a huge impact on the actual number of spaces needed. It's really the difference between the sort of customer area and the kitchen area that's going to be a bigger difference in those parking standards.
And then in terms of patios, does that fall under seating area?
Patios will fall under seating area unless they're seasonal. At this point, as I understand it, we're continuing our policy of not necessarily making someone build parking for a patio that's only here for a few months out of the year. But if someone were to have an all-seasons patio, we would put that under seating area.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
The Planning Commission had a really robust discussion on this, which I incredibly appreciate. The red lines are really dense, and our commissioners do an incredible job of reading through really, truly all of them. They had a couple of wording changes to our definitions, mostly just making language more precise and easy to understand. There was a discussion on animal clinics versus kennels, some of our tree definitions, which, as a note, you'll be approving, or I hope, you'll be looking at a section within 902 that has tree definitions. Planner Geezer will be coming through in about 2 weeks with a lot of changes to those tree definitions. So when you look at the tree definitions, just know that that's how the code is now, And any changes to those, talk to Nick. They had some amendments as to our health club examples, making those a little bit more precise, a note on lodging. Some discussion about allowed setback encroachments in residential districts like decks and uncovered porches. They ended up electing to leave that for the most part, but just making sure that that language was really precise. And then some discussion about whether open space was required for senior living developments specifically, like assisted living and memory care. And making sure that there was an indoor equivalent. Oh, sorry, there's another typo. Again, I mentioned that there was that parking standard change for personal fitness clubs versus health clubs. They decided to just have that be one parking standard instead of breaking it up. And then a pretty strong discussion about limiting accessory structure size as it relates to the total square footage of the home. In 917, there's a provision basically saying that your accessory structures can only be a certain percentage of your home's square footage. And staff had proposed maybe boosting that up to 50%, especially for those smaller lots that may be really limited. The Planning Commission pushed back on that because some of our really large lots and really large homes might have a lot to do if they're given 50% of leeway to work with. So they decided to go with 30, and then if you really do have a really small house or a really small lot, you can pursue the variance process, which is what it's for. For next steps, we didn't receive any public comments on this. Doesn't mean people don't care, but not enough to send in a public comment. So right now we can talk through some questions for staff, the council discussion. And then when considering this, consider whether these are consistent with the comp plan. If in your incredible knowledge of the zoning code, if there are any other conflicts that you can see that the previous groups of reviewers have missed. And if there are any other specific changes that should be made, and ideally we would phrase those as a condition to the resolution. There we go. And the motion in front of you will be to approve the first reading of Ordinance 826, approving the zoning text amendments for the definitions and performance requirements chapters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quarles. Wow, hats off to everybody who's worked on this. Questions of Ms. Quarles? Yes.
Madam Mayor, if I could just clarify for the record a couple things as you move into this. So in the past, we've had a resolution that accompanied an ordinance. We don't in this case because the findings are baked right into the ordinance. So if you're wondering about that, that's a change we decided on as staff. The ordinance itself is 826, and that begins on page 153. And then the attachments that are for the ordinance are actually embedded in some stuff that follow. But just for the record, I want to make really clear that attachment A to the ordinance that shows the red lines are attachments 7 and 9 of the staff report. They start on page 196 and page 242. So that's the ordinance you're considering in the attachments that are a part of the ordinance. Some of what follows the ordinance are not.
Okay, so you said there is no resolution?
That's right. Oftentimes, zoning ordinance amendments are accompanied by CUPs, other land use approvals. This is just a straight legislative update for council to consider. That's a city-initiated change. So with that, just to make things more streamlined, it's just this one ordinance that will have 2 readings.
City Manager, was it this item that my name appeared incorrectly?
I believe it's the last item, yes.
I thought it was item D, which is why when you said there's no resolution.
But still, the ordinance requires signatures.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse the matter. Sometimes we adopt a resolution and an ordinance when we've got a number of different land use approvals.
Okay.
So there's just one motion for the first reading. And I believe your name is correct there on page 154.
And if wherever it's not spelled correctly, we will change that
Okay.
for the record.
I mean, if we want to be accurate, it might be a good thing.
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
it's on page 159. So I think it was related to the, just had my one error there.
I will make sure that That's obsolete anyway, so that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's not included with tonight's action. That's just history from the planning commission. We caught that error after that and changed
Okay.
it right in the ordinance.
Okay,
Yeah, right in the ordinance.
fantastic, thank you. All right, questions of staff? No? Yep, go ahead, Molly.
Mayor, thank you. You last talked about the bar, and I just have a follow-up question about that bar area. What defines it as a bar area? Or is alcohol wrapped into it, or is a coffee bar part of that as well? Or sometimes there's just counter seating?
That's a really good question. I think that part of what we can probably talk about among staff is what the actual parking impacts of those sort of different types of bars might be. I don't know that a coffee bar would have the same impact on the surrounding area as a bar that's serving alcohol, but with the growing popularity of like non-alcoholic drinks in bars and that sort of thing, that would be something to consider.
Okay, great. And then the maximum height in the visibility triangle, you guys kind of made it sound like you were vacillating between 3 feet and 30 inches. Just curious how that shook out.
Sure. City manager, I think you had a discussion about this earlier today.
Yeah, I just had a comment, I think it was from the mayor, as to kind of the rationalization for reducing it a little bit. And I would ask Assistant Planner Quarles to provide that, but essentially the proposal that the Planning Commission recommended reducing it from 3 feet to 30 inches, just to give us a little bit more clarity.
Well,
Increase the sight line.
That kind of gives me a pause. Oh,
No, I just want to understand that better because I didn't even see the 3 feet in the red line version. So that's where I was wondering where the 30 inches came from as part of a discussion point.
Sure. So the place where that shows up in the red lines is on page 197 of the packet, and the previous definition talked about nothing shall be obstructed between the height of 3 feet and 6 feet on page 197, and then the amended version of the code talks about 30 inches being the maximum height for those elements in the traffic sight visibility triangle. This was a change that staff suggested, but not one that I think garnered really any discussion from the task force or from Planning Commission as to that number. We talked about the definition overall, but I don't know that we talked a lot about that 6-inch difference.
So, the reason I brought up the 30 inches and your diagram with the visibility triangle was helpful. My concern was more centered around how that might impact potential fencing. But it doesn't look like that triangle would, or maybe it would, you would know better than I, in terms of what kinds of applications you see. But I was thinking about corner lots and what kind of impact that might have to property owners who need to fence their yard, dogs and children, and because 3 feet is definitely not tall enough when you have either of those, meaning children or dogs.
yeah, that's a good point.
It's a great point. Part of what I was doing earlier today was prepping for our fence code amendments in a couple of months, so that's well timed. I'll note that within our fencing and screening chapter, it does note that no fence should be located in the traffic visibility triangle. So if you do have a corner lot, don't put your fence out that far if you're going to be blocking the view of traffic around that corner. So that might be a moot point in terms of fencing.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that answers my question then, thank you. Yes, if you can turn on your mic, and then will you need to go back to Molly, because I think she has some additional questions.
Molly, go ahead.
Well, my point was, 30 inches seemed kind of low, especially when we end up with feet of snow all winter long, and not everyone drives a SUV, so, but most people do, I suppose. Anyway, so I think I would revisit that one, or look at that when you do. I guess I just wasn't really clear what the new rule would be, or the new ordinance. And my last question is in terms of when people make changes to their existing businesses, So you want to do a remodel or change your scope a little bit. And maybe that does require a building permit, but maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure. Can you tell me how that affects the new parking requirements, or how the new parking requirements would affect an existing business?
That's a good point. I'm guessing this specifically more has to do with the restaurants.
Yeah, I would guess restaurants, but.
Most of the other
Curious
businesses
if
that,
anything triggers you from your, well, you were good 5 years ago, so you're still, so I guess in terms of all the businesses, but most restaurants came to top of mind as me as well.
I think mostly where that applies is restaurants. All of our other parking requirements have more to do with the total square footage of the business. So if someone were explicitly saying, hey, I'm going to expand my business and it's going to require a building permit, that would be a pretty easy, okay, yep, we're going to talk about getting some more parking in here. For a restaurant, I think we're going to have to take that a little bit more on a case-by-case basis. Like you mentioned, not everything that a restaurant does necessarily rises to the level of a building permit and to plan review, which is really what kicks that off. When it does, I think there's going to be some discussion about staff's judgment in that moment, if they're really saying, the difference between we're going to, extend our bar a little bit as opposed to we are doubling the size of our bar, we'd go, okay, you really need to revisit your parking because you're really going to draw a lot more people into your restaurant.
And I would just be aware that some trends too and some concepts include both restaurants with a retail element. So kind of keep an eye out for that, because they shouldn't be hit for all of that square footage parking wise if part of that has a retail element to it. That was it.
Great. Thanks, Molly.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Parkhill.
On the sight line, what are we going to do, for example, up here on, I think it's the corner of Rice and just right here,
Exactly my point.
the theater at the Blue Water? What are we going to do? Because you can't see anything. Do they take that hill out? Do we have to at least take off the brush, or do we leave it, is it grandfathered in?
I think the latter for the most part. Usually when we're looking at this, it's for items that are proposed to be placed within it. And then if someone were to say, place an item within their existing triangle, that's really proving to be a problem for people, we would look at code enforcement in that respect. But in terms of existing retaining walls, I think, yes, they would be like legacied into their current situation. If someone were to propose a new retaining wall in a traffic site visibility triangle, that would also generally fall under right-of-way encroachment discussion. So that would be something that the city engineer would look at in the case of new retaining walls. But when it comes to the old ones, yes, like with any zoning change, if you are made into something non-conforming, you don't have to change it just because we changed the zoning code.
Okay. One other thing.
Before you ask that question, if I may, that sidewalk, because of that issue, city manager, can we take a look at when we're scheduled to redo that sidewalk? And maybe that's the answer, is we widen the sidewalk or create some kind of mechanism on that corner to improve the sightlines.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we don't have any plans to redo it. We just been replacing it, but we can explore that as a separate project. Because I know we've talked about it in the past, that whole intersection. And,
Let's get some proposals from Public Works in terms of what we might do to improve those sightlines on that corner.
yeah, I'll mark it as a discussion item in our CIP discussion, which will happen, I think, in June. So it'll be coming up shortly.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So we didn't make any changes to health clubs and, what was it, health clubs and gym? Health clubs and
I think personal
gyms. What if you were just a personal trainer and you had, like Steel Fitness, for example? You didn't really have classes. Would that fall under service retail? Or could that fall under service retail if you had a different sort of environment? I'm just thinking about all the gym options, and I know that we are lumping.
It's almost a personal service.
You got health club with tennis courts, which you would think would be, really drive up their parking needs, you know? If
Well, I'm hearing like an individual personal trainer.
Yeah,
I think that for that use, I can't imagine that they would need a really large space for something like that if it were an individual training.
Skill Fitness, you know, they had that much space, whatever that is, and I don't know if they had more than, they had a couple trainers in there. You know, but
I think in the
don't
case
they
of-
were doing full classes.
Sure. I think in the case of a couple of trainers, when the Planning Commission talked about the difference between a personal fitness club and a health club, Steel Fitness specifically came up as an example of a personal fitness club. Just something that it's exercising, it's on a small scale. These aren't necessarily broken out because there are necessarily going to be, we have boutique classes listed as an example, but you don't necessarily have to be holding classes for it to fall under that category. It's really meant for those really small scale uses like Steel Fitness, like personal training, like small gyms that might not have a lot of people in them at one time. So if that answers your question.
But didn't you say that the health club and personal fitness were treated the same way parking-wise? That's what came out of, so it seems to be an undue burden on somebody there, however it works out.
That's a fair point. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that the shared parking standard between both of those elements is 1 per 300 square feet. And I think that, you know, if you were looking at having something that was, you know, 1,500 square feet of personal training or gym use, I don't think it would be super unreasonable to say that you needed 5 parking spots in that case. So that parking requirement should scale pretty well regardless of the size of the facility, or should scale with the size of the facility.
Even when you get to a big health club with a gym, tennis courts and all that.
Yes, and that was part of the Planning Commission's recommendation, was to treat those the same.
So even, I'd like to build a little bit on that. So a large health club, I think you mentioned an LA Fitness or Planet, whatever.
Planet Fitness.
Planet Fitness, thank you. If they hold group classes, so where there's an individual exercise component, but then they've got basketball courts and they've got, you know, a yoga class with 30 people in it, isn't that going to drive more parking need at once?
It's a fair point, and that was part of why we had looked at considering maybe breaking those out initially. I think what I began to think about as the Planning Commission discussed it was when you have these larger facilities within a larger center like that, for instance, an entire track or a tennis court or something like that, that's not an area that's going to be filled with gym machines necessarily. That's going to be an area that has more intermittent use. And when considering that 1 per 300 square foot parking standard, you know, if you've got a 20,000 square foot facility, which is what we start looking at with these really large facilities, that's like 67 parking spots, which is, I don't think, an unreasonably low or unreasonably high amount of parking for something like that. So I'm comfortable with having that 1 per 300 scale, just depending on how large your facility is. But if the council wants to discuss maybe having a different standard for each of these types of places, you know, I would consider whether that health club has a greater parking burden per square foot than the personal fitness club.
I think it would just, so when we look at surrounding communities that have, I mean, and the chances of us having a massive health club in Wayzata is probably pretty small. But over 3,000 square feet is definitely within the realm of possibility. I think it really depends on the use, right? It, not just individual, if you have 2 studios where all of a sudden you have an influx of 30 people in each studio, and they're all driving independently, you suddenly have 60 people all at once in maybe 3,000 square feet. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know that that works necessarily. I don't have an answer for you, but I'm just going to health clubs around the area. There's this ebb and flow depending on what's happening within the gym in that moment. So I think Councilmember Parkhill brings up a good point that we may need to revisit that section in particular.
So maybe to expand on your example, at the yoga studio I work at, 50 students per class in one studio and 30 in another. And it's about every hour on the hour, and they're completely full. And so there is a possibility that you could have that large of a volume in 3,000 square feet.
Core Power over here is packed. Yeah. And they don't have enough parking.
I'm sorry, could you talk into the mic a little bit closer?
Core Power Yoga over here just outside of Wayzata is packed, and they can fit that kind of volumes of people, and parking is an issue.
Oh.
And anecdotally, I rented from a few doors down from a Pilates studio, and in part of what I love about Wayzata is the super early classes aren't the busy ones. It's the 10 a.m.s.
1 p.m.
Yeah. And so
Lunch, yoga, Pilates.
it can be really quite disruptive to businesses around the studio.
Okay. Thank you, good discussion. More questions, Councilmember Parkhill?
I'm done, thank you.
No? Okay. Councilmember Iverson?
Just a few. So Val, can you just clarification on just a couple things? The first one's on page 181. And it's in regards to exterior, sorry, you guys, I got something in my throat. Exterior storage and display.
Do you need some more?
No, I had some, it didn't work, but thank you. So what I'm understanding is that there's a few exceptions for things that do not have to be in a building. Clothesline, completely understand. Not more than 2 recreational vehicles and equipment. Could you clarify that for me?
Yes, so the interesting thing about this particular section, which is for everybody's reference, also on page 198 of the red line of the packet, if you want to see the redlined amended version, we didn't change a ton about this. We just made an amendment to the chapter numbers, removed the space and clothesline, and then removed the exception for race cars. But other than that, this is the existing code for the not more than 2 recreational vehicles and equipment. I think the idea is that you should be able to park in your driveway, I think is the idea behind this. Maybe you're going to be parking a little bit more long-term, but it's your driveway. You should be able to park at least 2 cars, as opposed to maybe parking more than that would create some kind of visual impact on other neighbors.
So recreational vehicle, is that a 4-wheeler? Is that a snowmobile? What's the definition of recreational vehicle?
I'm on my way. I have a definition for that on page 224 of the packet. And so a recreational vehicle in this case is actually a lot bigger than a 4-wheeler. It's a little bit more of like a camper or something like that, or for seasonal use.
So people would be able to park an RV in their driveway or a camper, but not a boat?
I think we still prohibit boats.
But why an RV and not a boat?
It's a good question. I think this is in keeping with what the current policy is within the ordinance. I think part of what we were considering is whether we had the appetite within the task force and the planning commission for certain policy changes within here. We've talked about some policy changes with this group, but for the most part of our focus was, as with Ordinance 811, making sure that we weren't infringing on rights that people already had under the code. So that's part of where, especially the accessory structure discussion, that's where that factored in So when it comes to the storage of recreational vehicles, I don't think we saw the appetite to curtail it necessarily, nor with the allowed storage of boats, whether that was something we should expand or not. But that can certainly be something that the council discusses.
I mean, my personal feeling is, again, that's potentially a seasonal thing, and would we want RVs in someone's driveway year-round? And our
I'll note
boats?
it says 40 square feet or less.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make.
So that, to me, almost sounds like a pop-up camper.
Yeah.
As opposed to, right? I mean, I'm not really well-versed.
Where are you seeing the 40? I must be missing.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's on 224, letter R. And it's in that first line,
Oh, it's a tiny guy.
is 40 square feet, a vehicle that is built on a single chassis is 40 square feet or less when measured at the largest horizontal projection. I mean, I'm guessing that's a pop-up camper, right? Although it does say self-propelled or permanently towable by a light-duty truck. I don't know, but it's, yes. Councilmember Pleckett.
Yeah, when I read this, I kind of breezed right over it because I read recreational vehicle with the words that way as things like four-wheelers and snowmobiles and things that are rather small.
Yes.
But the term RV is really just an abbreviation for recreational vehicle. And when I read this and I thought, well, they couldn't mean two RVs parked, so it had to mean something else. So to me, it meant the smaller thing, but it is not an RV. It is not a big recreational vehicle. 40 square feet it's a snowmobile.
Right,
And most boats would be a lot bigger than that.
yeah. No, that's a good point.
Okay.
I have to add a quick correction. When I brought up the original definition of recreational vehicle, that was specifically within the floodplain regulations, which is a separate, I
Oh,
know.
we have a different flip.
We have a different one,
Recreational
and
vehicle.
that is over on page 225 of the code,
Okay.
or sorry, 230, Director Gellner?
What is it? What page?
Sorry, 230, and that includes manufactured homes less than 30 feet in overall length, but doesn't have that same square footage restriction that Councilmember Pleckett brought up.
So, I'm sorry, page 230, are we talking recreation outdoor private?
Recreational vehicle, which is the last definition
Oh.
on page 230.
So is that the one where?
That's the one that we would be referring to.
Okay.
Oh,
So do we have two definitions using the same words?
We have one definition that's for our zoning code in general, and one definition that is specifically for the floodplain district.
We ought to use different terminology.
And I would suggest that's outside the scope of these amendments tonight. If we want to look at floodplain definitions, I would need to really make that a whole new scope of work. It's a good catch that we're
Yeah,
making.
it is a good catch.
Just wouldn't be prepared to attack it tonight.
okay. We'll come back and look at that, though, because it is confusing.
Yeah, if we could just make a note of that for future amendments. Okay, so back to Councilmember Iverson's question. This would include manufactured homes less than 30 feet in overall length. 30-foot RV is substantial, including those with telescope or fold-down chassis, mounted campers, house cars, motorhomes, tent trailers, slip-in campers, converted buses, converted vans, and cars utilized for racing shall not be included in this definition. Okay, so with that new definition, thoughts? I mean, but we don't allow a 30-foot boat, but we allow a 30-foot motorhome.
It's a question I've always had.
I mean, I think we have to don't allow either of them, or allow both?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just a point of, is this something the Planning Commission looked at? Is it something we've changed, or is this in our existing code?
This is exactly as our existing code is.
So Madam Mayor, if that's the case, I think this is something you could flag for, as Director Gellner said, you could flag this for staff and the Planning Commission to look at, but we certainly wouldn't want to attempt to legislate on this tonight. So just want to put that out there.
No,
That's why it's important to look at the red line to see what's being changed and what's already there, and, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And then also then perhaps number 4 as well.
Sorry, what page?
I'm back on 181, the off-street parking of passenger vehicles and non-commercial trucks not to exceed a gross weight of 12,000 pounds.
I'm going to look at the red line version.
I don't think she took it out.
Can we have the corresponding page on the red line document?
I am working on it.
Okay. You're looking at exterior storage?
Yes.
916.12?
Yes.
Okay.
Page 198 in the red lines.
Thank you.
And again, that's a section that staff and the planning commission did not amend as compared to the current code.
So perhaps we'll just add that to the list then? Okay, thank you. And then I'll keep moving on for the sake of time for everyone.
Sure.
Non-red line, page 187. I think I just need some explanation. This is in regards to 919.04 yards, number 2. So it's features without roofs, including terraces, steps, decks, and porches. So help me understand, how close to the property line can those get?
So from a side yard and rear lot line, they can get within 5 feet of the property line. In the front yard, they can only go 5 feet over the setback. So in some, if you've got a 20-foot setback in a zoning district for the front yard, that would look like 15 feet away from the property line, et cetera.
And I'm guessing you guys didn't talk about this.
We did talk about it in clarifying that features without roofs language. The code has always talked about these sort of uncovered, roofless encroachments being less of a burden than, say, if you had a portion of your building, coming out over the setback, which is something we'd require a variance for. A really good example of this actually was the variance that the council looked at a couple months ago at 247 Central Avenue, which was for an existing deck that wanted to put a roof over top, therefore making it need a variance. The Planning Commission's comment on this was wording related, but they did talk about whether it made sense to curtail this or to limit this further. They decided they didn't want to infringe on rights that property owners already had to decide whether they wanted to put a deck, closer to their neighbor or not.
And I guess I'm trying to understand that I don't know if I'd want a porch 5 feet from my property line. And so I don't know if that's something other people feel that perhaps we should come back and revisit. It just seems that it should stay within the 10-foot setback.
The uncovered was stricken. So what kind of uncovered porch? Isn't that going to be attached to a home then?
I think the idea behind instead of saying uncovered porches and having that uncovered appear that it only applied to porches, we decided to add that language at the beginning saying features without roofs. And those without roof qualifier applies to all of those items listed there.
That makes sense. Okay.
Just seems awful close. Does anyone else feel similar?
To listen. Well, it would be 5 feet, so you lose 5 feet, right? Because it's a 10-foot setback?
Yes.
Depending on the zoning district.
Yeah. I mean, it's already, they're not changing the distance.
I guess the reason I'm bringing it up is that we're seeing more and more houses having the 10-foot setback. So we're having 20 feet between the houses. And if they don't both do porches, now we're ending up with potentially 10 feet between the houses that have now their structures that are impeding on it. And is that the direction we want to go? And this can be, since it's not up for tonight, it's not a change, maybe perhaps we add that to a list and come back and discuss that at another time.
Is that something, so these items, maybe you can help us understand kind of what's in the order of magnitude in terms of ongoing zoning work. Are there additional overhauls that are being looked at in terms of setbacks and other language, or is this the last of the
This is the
Work
last
product.
of this type of work at this point. If there are specific policy changes that the council is, as a group, really interested in pursuing, that would obviously be something that we would look at. I will note that the Planning Commission, if you check back both the recording and the minutes, talked about this provision pretty specifically. And part of the conclusion that they came to was talking about a little bit of a who got there first situation. If you've got two homeowners who all want to build side yard porches, if you've got one person who decides to build their porch all the way up to their limit, the other neighbor may decide that a rear deck is more appropriate for their situation. So that was what their discussion sort of concluded at, was that I think it's rare that I think people would choose to really build within 10, say that 10 feet of each other, and if they did, that's their call.
I don't know, I live by some neighbors that really like each other. I mean, it's easier to get together.
Well, I think it's also, the way I envision it, I think about some of the older houses that had side entries into the kitchen and had like those 2 steps, right? And I could see that you had your house at the 10-foot mark. It would allow you 5 feet of step to get into your side entrance. If I'm thinking back historically on some of the older homes and how they were built, not a deck, that's where you're sitting out and enjoying the afternoon sun, but literally a stoop, right, where the milkman would deliver the milk, or a milk person, or.
Well, yes, because I live in one of those old houses, but I did notice that there's a couple of the new homes that have gone up, and they have encroachments of their home that falls within the footprint of the basement, and that's allowed. So I'm like, well, how did that happen? So it just opens up the possibilities for people to do that. And as a council, do we want to allow that to happen? Because I see it, and what was a 20-foot difference between the 2 homes is now more like a 12.
Well, I think that's something when we talk about the strategic plan and what we want to do, if we want to take a look at setbacks, right? And define the scope of if it's a priority.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Mayor, and we can talk about it when we talk about just an update of the zoning study that we've done and how it relates to chickens, and then the strategic planning, because it all takes time and energy, and it's really more about prioritizing what's the most important, and I think that's a good discussion to have.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, one last one. Single-family dwellings on page 190. I think it's talking about roofing things. So number C, earth-covered, composition, shingled, or tiled roof. Can they have a metal roof? Metal's not included in there. And should it be?
It's a good point.
It's a good question. I don't know that we necessarily considered expanding the allowed roofing materials, whether a metal roof is or isn't allowed. It seems that our zoning code at least would imply that it isn't.
Well, then
Well,
you
I'd
better
rather-
come take mine off.
I'd rather have a metal roof than an earth roof.
That's right.
I don't know, in Ireland, they have those cute patch
So
roof.
cute.
Put the goat up there.
I guess we're going to turn Wayzata into the Shire, Hobbit town.
I mean, with my metal roof, I get a significant decrease in my insurance because of lack of hail damage. And so I think it's a good alternative for people to consider for roofing.
Well, and beyond that, I guess my question would be, with the constantly evolving construction materials and products that are available, are we limiting ourselves, or is there a reason why we call out shingled, tiled? I mean, that can mean, I guess, a number of different things. Composition or earth covered. I guess we don't know what could be coming down the road, right? Do we want to limit ourselves in that way? Is there more generalized language that we want to be looking at, to Councilmember Iverson's point?
It's a great question. I don't know that, I think off the top of my head, I don't know if I could write more generalized language on the fly for this particular meeting.
No, absolutely not, yeah.
But I think, there could be I would want, if there's a recommendation of the council as a whole to maybe add metal roofs to this, that could be something that we add. I would want to double check that with our building official, because metal may be a fairly encompassing term that includes maybe more than what we would want to allow in terms of types of metal and that sort of thing. But I do think that that's a common enough roofing type, both here in the Twin Cities and here in Wayzata, as evidenced by Councilmember Iverson's house.
Yeah.
There are metal tiles, by the way.
Well, that's shingled, and that's included.
Yeah. So would we be okay with the addition of metal tile or a metal roof, metal tile? Just off the cuff and maybe just looking at language like this more broadly at a future date?
Yeah.
I'm left to wonder why we even have that section in. I mean, who's going to build a house without a roof? Seriously. Why is it even in here? Was there somebody that built an open-air home at some point?
It was probably, I'm guessing it was probably, I'm trying not to laugh. I'm guessing it was probably to avoid a thatch roof, something that would not comport with fire code or building codes, but I don't know.
Madam Mayor, this is just one part of our code. There's a whole building code that's going to have a lot of specifications about what kind of roofs will meet the building code. So this is the zoning code, this land use stuff. So,
Can we just reference the building code?
When we do that?
well, I think that's what would happen if you took this section out. If you deleted the whole thing, it would have to be a roof material that was acceptable under the building code and that the building official was okay with.
How does the council feel about that?
Perfect.
Simple solution.
Clarification, yeah. Good.
That's just a thought from city attorney, but I don't know, Director Gellner.
Yeah, I've seen this kind of language in some other codes over time. It's old language from when the city was first developing. So it's even letter B is about just we have a minimum size home, right? Just setting a standard. That's not, we don't see that in the market anymore. These are really old rules. But you might still want to keep that minimum there just in case.
I might build a tiny home.
Yeah, so I would like to talk about it a little more before we strike it, and maybe talk to the building official a little bit more about it. It does seem like it's getting outdated, but I don't understand the unintended consequences yet of just deleting it in its entirety.
Well, if you just have a thing in there, it says with a roof that meets building code.
Madam Mayor and Councilman, there is section E there that talks about that. So that's one of the requirements.
So I'm back to striking it.
Yeah, I'd certainly, as
Yeah,
staff,
eased.
I'd certainly be open to striking it. I think what we would probably do is, we've got 2 weeks until the second reading of this ordinance, so we'd evaluate it in that time and come back with, I think, a recommendation for the council meeting in 2 weeks, if that makes sense to.
But don't we have to approve today what we're going to
Right.
approve in 2 weeks? I don't think we can make any amendments or changes in between.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, you can't change the ordinance between two readings. I suppose you could, one thing you can do procedurally, though, is ask staff to look at this and then have the first reading at a subsequent date.
Shall we do that?
Could we
Would that
just
be
add metal and that might solve it? He said that doesn't solve it.
We can't add metal tonight?
Madam Mayor, I think you could. You can do anything you want based upon the recommendation of the Planning Commission. I think the further you stray into areas that the Planning Commission hasn't looked at, I think the more you really have to have a grounding in health, safety, welfare, reasonable recommendation of our experts on staff. So I'd be reluctant to do a lot of those kinds of tweakings where we don't know the unintended consequences. It seems innocuous to me sitting here, but I'm not an expert on roofs or the building code.
Right.
So I guess, I don't know how the city manager feels about it, but I would almost rather you direct staff to look at that and bring it back for the first reading with some potential updates. or send it back to the planning commission. That's the other thing you do under the code. Takes a lot more time and maybe not needed, but that's an option you have.
I mean, I think from my personal preference, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the council, is, you know, let's go through the list of items we brought up, what would make sense to get back in by our next meeting, to come back to us. I would not want to have to ask the planning commission to go back through the process, and I think what we're looking for is relatively minor in terms of potential additions or deletions. But let's go through that list when we get to the end of our questions. Anything further, Councilmember Iverson?
I'm going to stop.
No. Just stay on point.
No, actually, the other ones, if I look at them, they're fine, because I think they're the right direction to go.
Okay.
I just,
Are you sure?
100% sure,
Okay.
you know, I would speak if there was things I was really concerned about. And so I have brought up the ones, the RV versus
Yeah.
boats, and then just the roofing material. So no, I'm comfortable, and the porch thing, making sure we don't have too much of an encroachment between two homes, so, but
That
thank
makes
you
sense.
anyways.
Okay, perfect. So can we run through the list real quick of the items? We had the health club parking.
So the discussion that I have, and I'm not sure if, let me just take a second to make sure that all of these are changes recommended as opposed to just sort of discussion points. Yeah, so the difference between the health club and the personal fitness center, that discussion. One of the items that we were having a little bit of a sidebar about that one, and one of the notes is that the neither of those uses has been added to the use table yet, either of them. So we could have a discussion about maybe that small boutique gym style is more appropriate for certain areas of town, as opposed to where we might allow a gym over 3,000 square feet, maybe further up on Wayzata Boulevard or some of our more open spaces. The difference between that recreational vehicle definition and the shoreland related definitions versus the regular definitions, I don't know if that's something we'd be able to tackle in 2 weeks, just because floodplain definitions, because that would require a lot of additional research into the floodplain district. Boats
May I-
versus RVs.
Yes, the boats versus RVs, but for the definitions, is it possible to just say recreational vehicle, parentheses, in the floodplain? To delineate between the two different kinds of,
I think the way I would administer the code now is that there is a heading above all of the floodplain definitions, and then they're all within that floodplain. It says floodplain-related definitions, and then lists them all. But it was even apparent tonight that that's not enough.
Right.
So we need to,
Okay.
label that a little bit better. I don't know that we need to amend the code now. I think as long as we know that difference, we'll be okay till we study it.
And typically, when we administer the code, where if, we've got our floodplain-related definitions, our shoreland-related definitions is its own big section, and those are broken out. I think the main reason I was confused was because I just, Control F, find and page my way over to recreational vehicle, and that's why that first one came up instead.
absolutely.
I didn't have the context
That makes
I needed.
sense. Okay.
So boats versus RVs, and then Councilmember Iverson had talked about this is the porches, and then discussing metal roofs was the other. And I think it is an important point on metal roofs to talk about the form of those roofs, because there's a difference between some of our straight, really beautiful looking, maybe tin roof style, as opposed to maybe a corrugated metal style is not necessarily what everybody is looking for. So considering that form factor when considering what a metal roof might be allowed to be like in town.
There's very different definitions when you look at those roof types. Oops, I'm sorry. There are very different definitions when you look at those roof types. And so there's a lot of data out there for you.
So in terms of tonight, it doesn't sound like we're ready for our first reading. And then to be able to come back to us in a timely fashion, I would almost like to break this out like the stuff that is specific to what we were to review tonight, the fine tuning and tweaking that's addressed in the red lines, and then anything else kind of go in a parking lot of further digging in and parsing out verbiage and how we want to address the ordinance. How does that sound? Does that make sense? I see one yes and one not, no.
No, I just need to be more clear on what you mean by that, Madam Mayor. So,
Yes.
because I'm thinking towards procedure here and a motion to direct staff to do something here, because it doesn't sound like you're going to ask for a motion to adopt the first reading.
Correct.
So are you saying that staff should come back with a proposed new ordinance that addresses these things that you can review and potentially have a first reading for? Or would you like these things left as they are in the status quo and have a new ordinance to read where they're not addressed and look at them later? Or what do you?
No. So we have a list of about 6 different items. Of those, like, I'm not picking on it, but the first one that comes to mind, the porches at 5 feet, that didn't even get touched in this reading. I would propose that goes in the parking lot to be addressed by staff at some juncture over the next few months, but not for the first reading.
Oh, I see. So in your motion to direct staff, there are some things you would have them look at for,
In the immediate term.
yes, okay. I'm tracking with you now.
Yeah.
Sorry if other staff is way ahead of me.
And Madam Mayor, just to
Yes.
clarify, I have the ones that could be, the points that could be addressed at the next meeting perhaps would be a little bit more research rationale for the 30-inch, 3 feet height deal within the
I think
triangle.
we're good on that.
You're good on 30 or 36?
The 30, weren't we?
Okay, that's good.
I think we were good.
And then the other 2 were just the health club parking and the roof materials.
Yes. And then everything else was going to get the recreational vehicle floodplain,
Yep.
the porches and 5 feet, and boats versus RVs.
Setbacks, exterior storage.
Yep,
Yep,
okay. So you have the list?
yep. Did you guys clear?
I don't know if I'm there yet. So my question would be, in the process of coming back to you with research on roof types and health clubs and parking, would you like us to go back to the zoning study task force and the planning commission and to you again? You want to just have those brought to you?
I mean, I'll ask the zoning task force members their thoughts.
So I want I don't think in just the one thing that should be discussed, but shouldn't, since the metal roof thing isn't being changed now, shouldn't that go into our bin, the parking lot bin, where we're going to talk about that later? And the only thing
that's
that you're
fair.
really making a possible change to for the redlining is how we're going to handle health club stuff. Is that right?
Right, so I think with roof types, my thought was that probably would warrant a little more conversation with other groups that may have some varying opinions on that, right? And I could see us diving a little bit deeper into roof types too, just because explaining them, and I don't know if we could bring that back right away in 2 weeks, because I'd like to have really specific direction about the language that you're looking for, if I'm gonna bring it back to you, or else I might bring back something that there's just a lot of debate over, right? With the health club, so maybe I'll stop there, but the other note I would have on health clubs is that we actually don't have health clubs yet anywhere in a zoning district, the way that it's written right now, so we need to figure that out as well. I don't know that we can really make that change in 2 weeks here.
Yeah, I think what came up for me in that discussion, meaning that the health clubs and the personal fitness studios are not in the use table at this point. So there's not a specific zoning district where we say, here's your gym, / here's your type of gym. So I think what might make sense is if we want to have a broader discussion about types of gyms in Wayzata, which sounds like it's a little bit of a broader discussion based on the quality of discussion tonight, I think that might make sense too, since we already have to amend Chapter 937 to account for those. If there are any changes we want to make to the definition of either of those two or the parking standards for either of those two, have that as one discussion topic, as one separate item, as opposed to trying to like grab at it over the next 2 weeks and see if we get it right, as opposed to giving it the discussion it deserves, given that we have a lot of that type in Wayzata and we're probably going to continue to have more.
Okay, so what's,
So Mayor,
what's coming
sorry,
back to
I
us?
don't mean to be unclear. I
No,
think that we have been working on these ordinance amendments since last summer. So I mean, unless there's any code language where, like, what we're recommending to redline feels like that just is not acceptable, then that would feel like a change that we could make with the attorney in the next 2 weeks. So that you could view that and it'd be very specific. If it's more broad about looking at roof types or health clubs more broadly, I think that kind of falls into the category that you have for setbacks, floodplain definitions, and outdoor storage, where I'd prefer to bring that through a larger process and think about them. I think it's hard for us to bring back language in 2 weeks that we can
No, of
think
course.
through.
But wouldn't section 902 for the health club, when it's talking about, we're combining the terminology, or, sorry, I don't have it in front of me right at the moment, but it had to do with the parking and the square footage. So health club and personal fitness club. Okay, I'm confusing things now. So I think Councilmember Parkhill, are you okay with the chapter definitions?
These two, I just think we need one more definition, or to say that if there's somebody who's going to be like providing more of a personal service thing, that can be classified as personal service, so there isn't as much parking required.
Okay. And then I think I had concerns with the same parking standards per planning commission recommendation because of the discussion that we had with the different types of classes running simultaneously.
And I think for health clubs, I would consider maybe doing a conditional use permit for that in our use table, because if it's a larger facility with ongoing classes at the same time, then we're affecting the area. And so there's probably maybe even more than just a parking problem that we need to be talking about. So that was my thought about how to think about health clubs going forward.
So are this parking standards, though, now for health club and personal fitness club, do we have specific parking requirements in our code?
Yes, so the amended Chapter 920 has one line, and it says personal fitness clubs and health clubs, and it's 1 per 300 square feet.
1 per 300, and that's where I think we have, so that's the existing number, or that's brand new?
That's brand new, because
Okay.
we didn't have gyms in the
That-
code at all.
Yeah, so that's, I think where I don't think that that's clear enough. So it doesn't sound like in 2 weeks we can tweak that either. Am I getting that?
Well, it does sound like you're more aligning with what staff had originally recommended, which was a differentiation. And then the planning commission went a different way, right? And they wanted to have it be the same. So it's a disagreement with the commission, I think, at this point. You'd
I
be
see.
moving forward with the original staff recommendation. Do you recall what the difference was?
I believe, I don't remember the exact numbers. I believe that health club had a higher parking standard than personal fitness club, but they were differentiated.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, just a quick question or point of clarification. If it's not in our zoning table, does it really even matter right now, since the definition is kind of null until it's incorporated into the zoning table? So that amendment's going to have to be made anyway, and that would allow us more time anyway to clean it up.
Yeah, I agree, and what I'm hearing is that it sounds like there should be a little bit of a broader discussion about gyms in general, especially if there's this discussion about whether, large-scale classes are held and that sort of thing. So since we're, and correct me, but I think since we're going to have to come back in order to get that into 937, and that's an oversight on our part. Part of what we were talking about with these additions was keeping it contained to the 5 chapters it was in and not expanding it to a 6th chapter. But with that came the miss on chapter 937. So I think since we have to tackle that anyway, it might make sense to have that broader discussion then. And in the meantime, it's not in the use table yet, so it's not really an applicable definition quite yet either,
Okay.
or parking standard.
So in terms of procedurally, do we still move forward with directing staff to make the requisite changes before we move?
Well, Madam Mayor, so what I think I'm hearing where you've landed is, I think you could, one option on the table is to adopt the first reading. And staff would run with the notes that you've given them. And your motion could be, to adopt the first reading of Ordinance 826 and to direct staff to work on the items identified by council that you'd like further staff work on, and bring that back. And that, depending on the scope of that, it might want to go to the commission and other task force for input. But I think that procedurally, that's what you could do. Sounds to me like that's where you may have landed.
Do we have to have the second reading within, I thought we couldn't have a first reading and then have any proposed
I'm sorry,
changes.
yes, Madam Mayor, we would not change a thing between the first 2 readings. They have to be identical. So, in other words, 99% of the work that has been done over the last few years on this 100% of the work would take effect and become part of our code. But in short order, staff would be back to follow up on some of the things that have been identified, and that would be a
With some
new
amendments.
ordinance. Yep.
Okay. How does the council feel about that? Are you good with that?
Good solution.
Good.
It
Yeah.
honors their work.
Yeah, I just want to make sure in all the things that are on your to-do list, that it doesn't get lost. That's all. And that it comes back in a timely manner.
So with the list that we have, can you give us some general timeframes to be able to, A, look into the matter, get back with the zoning task force, planning commission, and back to us?
So I think we could do a workshop on a zoning study update at our next council meeting. I reviewed the workshop agenda. We might have one other item potentially on May 16th. So I think that's when I can really give you that type of information.
Perfect. That sounds good. Yep. And city attorney, then that is when we will also pass the second reading, correct?
Not at the workshop, but at the regular meeting,
At the
that's correct.
regular meeting, yes.
Yes.
And that is for passing an ordinance, 3/5 vote. I'm just trying to keep track of who's going to be, we're going to have some folks.
Yes, we need an affirmative vote of a majority of council members, so it's 3
3, okay.
or more. Yep.
Okay, very good. So we're good with that? All right. Can we then put the resolution up on, or the?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, and I would say, in addition to what staff will tee up for you here, I noted earlier what the attachments to this resolution are, what the red lines are, so that's part of the record. And I think you could amend this proposed motion and direct staff to come back with follow-up amendments that have been discussed by council at the meeting this evening.
Okay.
Does that sound okay, staff? Yeah.
It all made sense when you said it. I tried to write it down. All right. How about we have a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 826, approving the zoning text amendments for definitions and performance requirements chapters, and for us to direct staff to make the changes we discussed here this evening. And anything else?
Madam Mayor, just a slight clarification of this second part. Just, they would bring back proposed follow-up amendments as discussed here this evening.
There you
Yep.
go. That's the motion.
So moved.
All right, perfect. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. Oh, all right. That takes us to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple quick things. One is later this week on Thursday, May 4th at 7 p.m., the Wayzata Historical Society is going to have their consolidation info session that Aaron Person had mentioned at the last meeting, so just a reminder for that. It'll be here at the community room at Wayzata City Hall. Last week here at the city was Administrative Professionals Day, so we took, some folks in the leadership group took our wonderful administrative services, our wonderful administrative professionals out for lunch that day, so special thanks to Lori, Megan, Robin, Emily, Becky, and a whole cast of others that help us out from an administrative perspective here at the city. We'd be lost and nothing without them, so we thank you. This week is Clerk's Week, so props to the wonderful Kathy Learvig for all the work she does here at the city. And the week of May 14th through May 20th is National Police Week. So this is preemptive, but we really appreciate all of our police officers, our entire police department for all the work that they do in keeping us safe. And I'm excited to celebrate them in a couple weeks. That's all I have.
All right, fantastic. Let's see, we don't have anybody on Zoom, I take it?
We do not. We did have a note from, I think, Councilmember Iverson. She wanted to ask
Yep.
a few questions.
I remember. Yes.
I gotta look at my notes. It's been a long night, you guys. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna bring it up another meeting. Not tonight, but thank you for remembering.
Okay, very good. All right, then that leaves us with a motion to adjourn. Would someone care to make that motion?
Make that motion, Madam Mayor.
Excellent, thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. We are adjourned.